Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of True Crime with Kendall Ray. Thank you so much, as always, for joining me today. And if you're new to the show, then welcome. I'm so happy to have you here. Thanks for stopping by. And if you enjoyed this episode, I hope you'll consider clicking subscribe so that you never miss an upload from me. Okay, guys, today we have a case that is just guaranteed to make your blood boil. I mean, oh my God, the rage that has coursed through me while preparing for this episode. I think you will all understand very quickly what I mean by that, because I'm going to be telling you about the horrific murder of Eliza Fletcher, who was a wonderful human. And when I tell you that she was failed by the system, she was failed. I mean, there's just no other way to describe it. What happened to her was completely preventable. And when you hear the details of how our system failed her, I think you are just going to be floored. And I mean, I'm sure we talk about cases where the system fails our victims constantly, but this one just especially stood out to me because it was completely preventable. And Eliza was just such a good person. She was a mother, she was a teacher, and she truly seemed to add so much joy and value to everyone's life around her. And over the last couple years and beyond, but I think especially lately, there's been a lot of talk about the dangers of running outside as a woman and how often we see horrific things happen when women are just exercising and enjoying the outdoors. And in Eliza's case, she was training for the Boston Marathon. She was a serious runner. And I have recently gotten into running over the last year. Which I never thought I would ever run, but I actually really enjoy it. And I record this show on Fridays, and so every Friday morning over the past month or so, I've been trying to run a 5K just because it, I don't know, gets me kind of zoned in and focused and just kind of pumped up to record. And God, when I was doing my run this morning, I could not help but think about Eliza, and I got so emotional just thinking about how that was something that she loved so much, how much joy she got from running, how much the endorphins and the accomplishment, and how she was so excited for the Boston Marathon coming up, the fact that she had qualified for it, and that was all taken from her. And it must have just been so shocking to be completely in the zone like that, focused on her run. And then just out of nowhere, the unimaginable happened to her. I personally only run inside on my treadmill, and I hate to say it, but it's cases like this that make me afraid to run outside. And I've been trying to get up the courage to actually go out and run, but then I hear stories like this, and it is such a scary world for women. And I certainly don't want this case to scare other people who get so much joy out of exercising outside. That's not my intention. I'm just trying to be honest about my personal fears as a woman living in this country. And I guess really this applies to women all around the world. I just can never understand how someone could be so cruel, and especially to someone like Eliza. All right, guys, let's go ahead and jump into this case. And as always, I want to start out by telling you what I've learned about Eliza Fletcher. So Eliza Welford, her maiden name, otherwise known as Liza, was born on November 9th, 1987 in Memphis, Tennessee to her parents Adele and James Welford. And she had one brother named Gil. She was raised in Memphis, and at an early age, she attended an all-girls school called St. Mary's Episcopal. And after that, she went on to attend Hutchinson, which is an all-girls college preparatory school, where she really shined both academically and athletically. Liza was a particularly talented soccer player, very dedicated to her sport. And after high school, she actually went to play at the University of Memphis. And she was even part of their championship winning team her sophomore year. And I wanted to share a quote from her coach. He said, "It might sound cliche, but she literally always had a smile on her face. Even when I would have to get on her, she still had a smile on her face. That's just who she was. As a soccer player, she was very athletic and had track-like speed. She was just a worker. She always looked at things as the glass being half full, not half empty. Her attitude was infectious. And despite being scouted to play for that university, she ended up transferring to Baylor, where she completed her degree in sports and exercise science. And then she actually went on to get her master's degree in teaching from Belmont University. And after that, she went on to become a kindergarten teacher and a soccer coach at a school called Promise Academy. And then most recently, she had gotten a job as a junior kindergarten teacher at St. Mary's Episcopal, which, if you remember, is the same school where she was a student at all those years ago, which I'm sure was a really full circle moment. And by all accounts, I mean, from everyone, Liza was an incredible teacher who was truly passionate about teaching and about children in general. I mean, she would do whatever she could to get her students excited about what they were learning. And I think we've all had teachers like that over the years. I mean, hopefully at least one teacher in your education who made you feel heard and excited and just supported through your education journey. And it's been said by many that she sort of had this childlike spirit, and that energy, I think, is what made her so good at what she did. She was also super, super patient and kind. And a friend of hers actually said that Liza had taken her own struggles with reading from when she was a kid and used that as an inspiration to help her students. Oh, and I loved this. And I think this really tells you about how passionate she was about education and her students. Her house was actually filled with artwork made by her students. And from everything I've read about her, specifically when it comes to being a teacher, I get the vibe that she was sort of like Miss Honey from Matilda. And if you haven't seen Matilda, you probably don't understand what I mean by that, which you should. Matilda is one of the best movies of all time, in my opinion. But she seemed to just truly care about her students, you know? Even during the pandemic, during the remote learning in 2020, Liza would make videos for her students, including this really sweet one of her singing This Little Light of Mine, and I just had to play it for you.
This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine, let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Miss you girls. Now you need to let the light shine at your house, and I will see you later. But wait 1 second. I heard somebody that you might want to meet. Janie, come here, girl. Come here, Janie. Come here, Janie. Hey, look, girls. This is Janie. And Janie is the girl in our house because there's 2 little boys and a Mr. Fletcher, and so there's just me and...
And I don't think it'll come as a surprise to hear that her kindness and positivity really extended outside of the classroom too. She just was nice to everybody in her life. And one friend actually described her as a breath of fresh air. And then I loved this. She also described her as a walking smile. Liza seemed to really be able to spread joy in every community that she was part of, and that included her church as well. She was a very active member of Second Presbyterian Church, and it was actually there that she met her husband, Richard. And the senior pastor at their church said that Liza and Richard were both really leaders in the community. And the 2 of them ended up getting married on March 8th, 2014 in the very church where they had met. Their wedding was even featured in Memphis Magazine, and everything about it seemed really, really cool and beautiful, of course. I mean, both of them really loved outdoors, so their reception was woodland themed, and their cake was decorated with hand-spun sugar in the shape of mushrooms and ferns, and they even hired a local artist to paint on-site portraits of the event, which I feel like is something more people are doing these days. It's really, really cool. And I think in that way, they were sort of ahead of their time. And that magazine also reported that Liza's parents happily gave her the wedding that she envisioned, which actually brings me to a point that I want to touch on. And it's something that's reported a lot in this case. And it's not super relevant to the case, actually, but Liza was kind of an heiress. I mean, she she was an heiress. Her grandfather on her mother's side was Joe Orgill III. And maybe some of you have heard of him, but he was a Memphis businessman and philanthropist as well who founded Orgill, which is a hardware supply company. And today the company is valued at $3.2 billion and employs roughly 5,500 people. It's described as a family-run business and is reportedly the world's largest independently owned hardline distributor. And so, as you can imagine, Liza's family was blessed with a lot of financial privilege. That being said, though, I feel like if you just had met her, you would never really get that vibe from her because she was so down to earth and she wasn't active in the business either. And she was so much more than just an heiress. I mean, instead of going into the family business, or I guess potentially if she wanted to, I imagine she wouldn't have to work, but she wanted to, give back to the community in the way that she felt drawn to, which was teaching. I mean, she chose a harder career path. Being a teacher can be very, very difficult, and she wanted to spread joy and light to children. I think that just says so much about who she was, and by all accounts, she absolutely loved her job. One of the moms at the school said that Liza always had a smile and a positive attitude and was just such a good influence on her daughter. And then she became an amazing influence on her own children when she and Richard had their 2 sons, Richard and Harry. Now, I couldn't pinpoint exactly when they were born, but I do know that they were incredibly young when everything happened. And everyone that has spoken about her publicly said that she was a extremely dedicated and loving mother who was so passionate about being a mother and being there for her children and making sure they had the best lives possible. And I feel like as a kindergarten teacher, it sort of goes without saying, but she was really born to be a mother, it seemed. She was patient and nurturing, and not to mention really, really fun. She and Richard were both very active people, and they really brought that into their parenting style as well. As a family, they would go hiking, boating, biking, play water sports, you name it. And like I mentioned at the beginning of this episode, Liza's passion for being active does play a role in this case. As I explained, she was an avid runner and very good at it. And I'm guessing that stemmed from playing soccer for the most part. And as an adult, she participated in running several marathons, actually. This included the Princess Half Marathon at Disney World in February of 2022, which I've heard is a blast, as well as the annual St. Jude's Children's Research Hospital Marathon, where she finished 22nd out of all the women with a time just under 3.5 hours, which absolutely blows my mind. I do not understand how anyone runs a marathon in general, let alone in that time. That's just like insane to me and so inspiring. That's what qualified her for the Boston Marathon, which is definitely not an easy accomplishment. And then something else I learned about Liza that just gave me chills as soon as I read about it is that she was really interested in true crime, and she liked to listen to it while she ran. And she would post about listening to popular shows like Crime Junkie, which I think is the most popular true crime show in the world, pretty sure. And also Tom Brown's Body, which I've never heard about. I'm interested in learning about that potentially. But in 2020, she had actually made a social media post asking for recommendations for other true crime podcasts. And so I'm sure you guys are already having the same thoughts as me. It's not lost on any of us that just 2 years later, she would devastatingly become the center of her own national crime story. So that brings us to Friday, September 2nd, 2022. 34-year-old Eliza Fletcher left her home at 4 a.m. to go on a run, which is also really impressive to me that she can get up that early and run as much as she did. And I learned also that the reason that she would do it as early as possible is that she could maximize the time with her sons that way. You know, if she could get the run done before they even woke up, then she would have all this extra time with them. But this was part of her Boston Marathon training, and that morning she planned to take her typical 8-mile route. And that route had her running into areas of the University of Memphis campus. So this was very much part of her normal routine and training, especially as she's approaching the Boston Marathon. And it wasn't some crazy secluded area. The thing is, though, Liza never made it home. Now, her husband Richard was pretty aware by this point how long it would take her to go for these runs, and so when she didn't make it back, he started to really worry. And by 7:45 a.m., he was already on the phone with police reporting that she had never returned. And I don't get to say this often, unfortunately, and I do have a lot of things to say about this later on, but in this case, the police took her disappearance very seriously immediately, and they jumped into searching for her right away. And thankfully, it actually wasn't long until they found something. It turns out that around 6:45 a.m., a biker who was riding near the college campus came across a cell phone, and the phone was very badly shattered and clearly left behind by someone. And when investigators went to go check it out, they quickly learned that the phone belonged to Liza. And as you can imagine, the fact that it was shattered was a horrible sign. It obviously suggested that something may have happened to her, like maybe a struggle, and the phone was dropped or destroyed as a result. And that wasn't all that they found. They also discovered a water bottle and a pair of men's Champion Slide sandals, all of which were immediately sent off for an expedited DNA test. Meanwhile, there was a heavy police presence going door to door to see if anyone saw or heard anything. And can you imagine if all crimes were treated this seriously right off the bat, how many cases that we cover here and just cases in general would be solved, cases that aren't solved or have taken forever to solve. It would be a much different story if they were all treated the way that Liza's case was. Because when you hear how quickly they were able to solve this case, it really makes you realize the power of an active and effective investigation that happens with urgency. Because listen to this. Investigators ended up very quickly getting access to surveillance footage from a nearby camera, and through that, they were able to see what happened to her. And that's another note. So often in the cases that we cover here, the surveillance cameras just aren't working or aren't turned on or whatever bullshit may be in that specific case. But thankfully, in this case, they were working and they were able to figure it out very quickly. Now, the entire footage was not released to the public, thankfully, and even if it was, I'd obviously never show it to you, but here's a description of it so you can get an idea. At 4:20 a.m., just 20 minutes after leaving her home, Liza was captured jogging along Central Avenue near the intersection of Zach Curlin Street. And this is when a dark-colored 2013 GMC Terrain drives past her, pulls over, and waits for Liza to run by. And when she does, a man gets out of the car and starts running towards her. Then they say there was a brief struggle between the two of them before Liza was ultimately overpowered and forced into the car. And then sources also say that this man then parked for about 4 minutes with Liza in the car before taking off. And while we don't know exactly what happened in those 4 minutes, all I can say is it was nothing short of evil, and I cannot imagine how terrified and confused she must have been. And whoever it was, and luckily we do know who it was, they definitely planned to do this. It turns out that that same car was also spotted on surveillance driving around the area about 24 minutes before the abduction. He was even spotted passing Liza at one point, meaning that he was seeking someone out, sort of hunting. And get this, all of this information was discovered by 9 a.m., which blew my mind. That, just to give you some perspective here, is a little over an hour after Richard had reported her missing. So by 9 a.m., the Memphis PD was already issuing a city watch and released photos of Liza, as well as photos of that GMC Terrain, which local media was very quick to share. They didn't have a super clear image of the car. They couldn't even see the full license plate number, but they could see that it had a broken taillight, which made it a bit easier to distinguish from other cars. And then around that same time, an alert was sent out to students informing them that an abduction had taken place near campus. And apparently, in the last few weeks, there had been reports of someone who was harassing members of the women's cross-country team. So there was obviously fear that they could be related, but they did announce in a news briefing that it wasn't connected. And then another thing that was really surprising to me, and I wish would happen in all cases where they need the extra support, multiple law enforcement agencies got involved very quickly, including the FBI and the TBI. And in so many cases, we sometimes see months before the FBI gets involved. So the fact that they were on it from that first day I'm very grateful for that. But at the same time, I wish that was just always the case. They were really, really on top of it. And what's interesting too is the public was not aware of how much work was going into the case. I mean, it blew up all over social media. A lot of people wanted to get involved in helping find Liza, which, as we probably all know, can be a good thing and a bad thing. I mean, attention to a case is incredibly helpful, vital, but it also does come with a lot of speculation sometimes, and sometimes it is detrimental speculation. And because all of it was so new and people were freaked out and wanting answers, and there was such little information out there as it was first breaking, people on social media began to look at those closest to her right away, specifically her husband, Richard. And so rumors quickly began to swirl that Richard had murdered her either to get a hold of her inheritance from her grandfather or because an affair they thought that he was having with a nanny. People even had the nerve to compare this poor man to Chris Watts and Brian Laundrie. People were analyzing video clips of him where he was crying and saying he was faking it, and it makes me so mad, and I can't even imagine what this must have been like for him. I mean, here he is terrified. His wife is missing, the mother of his children, and he has two very young children to console during all of this. And then total strangers online start to speculate that you did the worst thing imaginable, kill your own wife. Thankfully, though, this didn't last long because answers as to who actually did this came very quickly. Just a day later, on September 3rd, the DNA test results came back for those champion sandals. And it turns out that there was a match in CODIS to a convicted felon named Cleotha Henderson. He also went by the last name Abston, and I believe that's his mother's maiden name possibly, but based on everything I've seen, his legal name is Henderson. And they even found surveillance footage of him wearing those same champion sandals just days prior to her abduction. Investigators learned that he worked for a cleaning service, and when they reached out to his boss, they learned that he had been sent to clean a local movie theater, and that is where they ended up seeing him wearing the flip-flops in surveillance footage. They also confirmed with his boss that he did, in fact, drive a GMC Terrain, the same car involved in Liza's abduction. And they also learned that the vehicle didn't belong to him. It was registered to a woman, but they were able to connect him to her and therefore connect him to the car. Plus, on top of all of that, which is already looking like he's their man immediately, they also got his phone number and they were able to confirm that he was in the vicinity of the abduction site when it occurred. So given all of that evidence, he is definitely looking like their guy, and they needed to track his ass down very quickly. And like everything else so far in this case, it didn't take long. That same day, September 3rd, U.S. Marshals located the GMC Terrain parked outside of an apartment complex. The vehicle had that damaged taillight and matched the partial license plate that was seen on surveillance footage. And of course, this idiot did try and run, but he was thankfully quickly detained and charged with aggravated kidnapping, tampering with evidence, theft, identity theft, and fraudulent use of a credit card, and therefore was held on a $500,000 bond. And by the way, I'm sure you're wondering about those other charges. They actually were not related to Liza's disappearance. It turns out that he had committed all kinds of crimes before that. And so when they got him, they were able to add those additional charges too. Remember that surveillance footage from the movie theater that showed him wearing the champion slides? Well, that same theater also caught him on camera stealing a wallet from an employee there. And apparently he had found her wallet after she left. And instead of doing the right thing, what most of us, I would hope, would do, and giving it back to her, returning it to the theater, whatever the case may be, he decides to go on a little shopping spree, and he actually spent over $900. So to say that this guy is a bad dude, I mean, before what he did to Liza, it doesn't even begin to describe it. There's so much more that I need to tell you about how horrific this man is. And after his arrest, neighbors who lived at his brother's apartment complex even spoke out about how Cleotha had made them feel very uncomfortable. One neighbor said that he once tried to pay her $100 in exchange for sex, and when she denied him, he propositioned her 20-year-old niece with the same offer. She described him to the press as creepy and as a pervert, and I'd say that he is that at a minimum. His mom, though, and not shocking here, I mean, we see this all the time, right? But she said that she didn't believe that he did anything and that he was being, quote, railroaded. Ridiculous. And when you hear about his criminal history, I think you're going to have a very different opinion. It turns out that Cleotha's crimes date back to when he was just 11 years old. And between 1995 and 2000, he was arrested 16 times. That's 16 times in 5 years. And if I went over each one of those, we would be here all day. So I'll just give you some of the details. So when he was 14 years old, he was arrested for allegedly sexually assaulting a man. And because he was a minor, there isn't that much information on this, but here's what I do know. It was also during the time that he was arrested for theft, aggravated assault, and unlawful possession of a weapon. He was also reportedly a member of a gang and picked up the prison name Pookie. And then when he was 16 years old, he kidnapped a man at gunpoint. Get this. On May 24th, 2000, Cleotha and his friend approached a Memphis attorney named Kemper Durand while he was in his vehicle. Then they forced him into the trunk of his own car at gunpoint and drove around with him for several hours. After that, they get him out of the trunk and then drove him to a gas station to withdraw money from an ATM. And thankfully, though, while they were there, Kemper was able to scream for help. And despite them fleeing the scene, they were later found and arrested. Cleotha did end up pleading guilty, but in all honesty, I don't think he had any remorse, and I know that's how Kemper felt. He actually told authorities that while in the trunk of the car, he could hear Cleotha's friend pleading with him to let him go, but Cleotha refused. And in his victim impact statement, he said, quote, "It is quite likely that I would have been killed had I not escaped." And I completely agree with him. I think he was very, very lucky to be able to get away. And if that wasn't crazy enough, listen to this. Kemper actually worked as a defense attorney for the law firm Lewis Thomason. Now, weird side note here, Liza's uncle actually ended up working at that very same law firm, and there was never any connection found between this, but I just wanted to share that with you because it seems like a strange coincidence, right? But it definitely doesn't seem that Cleotha was trying to learn from his mistakes and better himself once he was incarcerated. He received a 24-year sentence for that abduction, and while in prison, he was accused of 19 different incidents of indecent exposure, with one guard later describing it as if he couldn't help it. Yet despite this, and this is the reason why I bring all of this up, is he was released early from prison in 2020, which was just 2 years before Liza's abduction. And I'm sure you've already put two and two together, but that means that if he had actually served his full sentence, Liza would still be here today, which is infuriating to think about. But let's jump back into the timeline because I've definitely veered off here a little, and there will be several times where I need to do this in this episode to explain everything fully, but we still have a lot to go over. So even though Cleotha was arrested, what exactly happened to Liza was still a mystery because he, no surprise here, refused to talk and wouldn't give any information as to where she was. So everyone, including her family, was just desperate for answers on how to find her. And on the day of his arrest, they actually made a statement and offered a $50,000 reward for information leading to her safe return. And a vigil was also held at her church where people came together to pray. And this is just maddening, but even with someone behind literal bars, some people were still trying to point the finger at her husband. I think that's mainly because people love a good scandal like that. And also, I think people have trouble admitting when they're wrong. But yeah, some were even going as far as saying that his crying during the statement was just an act and that he was still acting suspicious. And I will say that most people online that were speculating these things about Richard came to their senses and realized he had nothing to do with it and actually apologized. But there were a few people who took a while to admit that they were wrong. But let's be real, this is not the first time that we've seen online speculation like this that is incredibly damaging to people who are already in extreme amounts of pain. So I bring all this up because I hope instances like this can teach people how important it is to wait for the facts before just throwing out these wild extremely hurtful accusations. And that's actually why, with a lot of cases, I purposely choose to wait to cover them depending, on the case. But I just think getting as much of a picture of what actually happened, getting as many facts as possible before reporting on something is really, really important. But anyways, getting back to Liza, these search crews were putting their best foot forward. And I mean it, they were truly looking high and low. Search teams looked in dumpsters, in ponds, in parks, and they also brought in dogs, ATVs, and even a helicopter. And through all these efforts, investigators ended up speaking with Cleotha's brother, whose name is Mario, and he ended up being really helpful. It turned out that Cleo had gone to Mario's house just the day before Liza was abducted. And according to his brother and also an unnamed witness, Cleotha was behaving oddly, which was actually confirmed by surveillance footage. While he was there, surveillance cameras outside of the apartment captured him cleaning the inside of his car for over an hour, starting only hours after Liza was taken. And this was confirmed by his brother Mario, who also mentioned that Cleotha was washing his clothes in the sink. And because of this, investigators did have reason to believe that there might be evidence inside of Mario's apartment. And ultimately there wasn't, but they did end up finding some other stuff and arrested Mario for intent to manufacture and sell fentanyl and heroin, as well as possession of a firearm. But Mario's apartment, or I guess I should say the area of his apartment, wasn't a total dead end, because it turns out that cell phone data that was taken from the day of the abduction actually showed that Cleotha was at an intersection less than a mile from Mario's place. So they decided to focus their search efforts on that area. And while they were out there, one officer noticed tire tracks near an abandoned house, as well as a strong smell of decay, which is ultimately when they made the incredibly devastating discovery. Around 5 p.m. on Monday the 5th, just 3 days after her abduction, and only 7 miles away from the abduction site, the body of Eliza Fletcher was discovered in the tall grass near a set of steps behind the vacant home. And also, purple Lululemon running shorts that were consistent with the pair that Liza was wearing were also found in a trash bag about a quarter mile from where she was located. Her body was then sent to West Tennessee Regional Forensic Center for an autopsy, and it was ultimately determined that she died from a gunshot wound to the back of the head. They also found that she suffered multiple jaw fractures and injuries to her right leg. But what it couldn't determine was whether she was sexually assaulted. And I know for everyone's sake, we're just praying that that wasn't the case. We did learn that there was fentanyl in her system, but the report didn't determine how long it was there. I will say though, and of course you can never truly know, but I'm sure most of you agree, based on everything we know about Liza, everything that, has been reported about her from her loved ones and just the life that she was living. I mean, she's running marathons and teaching and parenting. I highly, highly doubt that she was using fentanyl recreationally before her abduction. I mean, it just doesn't make any sense, right? And so the following day, Cleotha's charges were upgraded to include first-degree murder and first-degree murder in perpetration of kidnapping, and his bond was revoked. And then after this, law enforcement was able to confirm that the same GMC Terrain was seen driving in the area where her body was found shortly after the abduction. So not only did his phone place him there, but his car did too. And as you can imagine, when the news broke on the 6th, everyone was absolutely devastated. I mean, obviously her family, but the community as a whole. I mean, you never want to believe the worst in any situation, but the worst truly came true here. The community was just broken, but they really tried to keep Eliza's light shining throughout it all. And the faculty and staff of her school had started their day in the chapel by lighting candles in her honor, which I thought was really beautiful. And they also offered counseling and chaplain support to any of the students who needed it, which I imagine a lot of them probably did, especially considering what a beloved teacher she was. The entire school also honored her by reading The Boy, the Mole, the Fox, and the Horse by Charlie McKessie. And they used an excerpt of the book in their official statement on Liza, saying, quote, "We don't know about tomorrow," said the horse. "All we need to know is that we love each other." And then they ended up putting together a makeshift memorial at the abandoned home where Liza was found, and the community support continued to stay strong. Losing Liza in such a horrific way hit Memphis as a whole so deeply, whether you knew her or not. This was a pain that was felt by everyone in the community. I mean, at least people that were following the case. And no one could wrap their minds around how something like this could happen, especially to someone like her. And this poor community continued to go through so much because her murder wasn't the only one that week. On September 7th, there was a day-long shooting spree that resulted in the death of 3 people, with an additional 3 people who were injured. 19-year-old Ezekiel Kelly shot multiple people, committed 2 carjackings, and live streamed himself on Facebook. And I also wanted to mention the victims who lost their lives in that shooting, starting with 24-year-old Dwayne Tunstall, a father of 1 with another on the way, who had actually just purchased a barbecue trailer with his business partner and planned on opening a food truck called Everybody Eats. And then there was 62-year-old Richard Clark, a correctional officer and security guard who was absolutely adored by his family and a beloved uncle to his nieces and nephews. And then finally, 38-year-old Allison Parker, a medical assistant and mother of 3, whose oldest daughter was actually with her at the time of her death. And I cannot even imagine how traumatic that was for her. So the pain that this community was feeling during that week, I mean, it's horrible. There's no other way to say it. But in times like tragedy, there's so often these little glimmers of beauty and hope within communities like this. And a big reason that I wanted to talk about her story today, despite the pain that everyone was feeling, is because Liza's community just came together in such a beautiful way to honor her memory. And her loved ones wanted to do something with their grief. And that's how Let's Finish Eliza's Run was born. A Facebook page was created, and 1 week to the day that her life was stolen, over 2,000 people showed up to finish her run. This event looked so inspirational, so beautiful, and I cannot imagine how everyone was feeling, especially with it being so fresh. Their Facebook page read, "We created this run to honor Liza and cope with our own feelings. Our goal is to stand up for the women in the Mid-South and emphasize that women should be able to safely run any time of the day." As you can imagine, there was a ton of fear in the running community after what happened to her. And of course, this is a fear that has been there all along, but it's especially heightened after something horrific happens like this. And I'm sure this won't shock you, but there was also some victim blaming, and this part really pisses me off. A professor at Harding University, which blew my mind that someone in that position would be unprofessional and disgusting enough to make a post like this, but he posted on Facebook saying, "So a woman goes jogging by herself at 4 a.m. in Memphis, parentheses, but it could have been anywhere, and she is abducted. Shocker, exclamation, exclamation. I am so sorry something bad happened to her, but she put herself in harm's way for being anywhere at 4 a.m. by herself. Maybe her husband should have been more forceful. People everywhere, please remember this incident as you make decisions in the future. We all pray this ends well." And God, I have so many things to say on this. First of all, I'm so sorry something bad happened to her. Something bad. That sounds like she tripped and fell or injured herself. She was murdered, bro. Maybe her husband should have been more forceful. Disgusting. I hope everyone learns from this. And then to say, please, people everywhere, remember this incident as you make decisions in the future. And we all pray this ends well. Bro, what the fuck are you talking about? This did not end well. I don't know how anyone gets on the internet and says such a horrific thing after something like this, but I guess I shouldn't be shocked. We see this all the time, right? But he later deleted his ridiculous post, his offensive post, and apologized, but I'm sorry. Apology is not accepted. That is just the most foul thing someone could possibly say in the aftermath of this. And obviously, the biggest problem with this post is they put zero blame on the person who's responsible, which is something we see in our society all the time. This idiot is really trying to suggest that Liza deserved to die because she went on a run early in the morning, and that her husband, also blaming him, should have been more forceful and not allowed her to go. It is not a failure of Liza. It is not a failure of her husband. It is a failure of the killer and of society as a whole for the way that we raise men in my opinion. And people who participated in Let's Finish Eliza's Run definitely wanted that to be known. So at 4:20 a.m. on September 9th, people gathered to run 8.2 miles, the distance that Liza was planning to run the day that she was killed. Memphis PD helped by blocking traffic on Central Avenue to keep the runners safe, and they took the path where she had planned to go. And I love this, but so many people stopped along the way, leaving flowers or pausing to pay respects. And one of the runners there actually said that she felt the safest part of the run was when they got to the University of Memphis campus, and was just struck in that moment by how Liza could have been abducted in this area. And it wasn't just the runners who came out to show their support, it was also just people in the community, tons of people who lined the running path. They cheered on the runners, held candles, and sang "This Little Light of Mine," the song that Liza was singing in that video I played for you earlier. And a few of the reporters who were there that day said that they heard sentiments such as people were running for those who can't, and that Liza could have been any one of the women gathered there. And runners didn't just gather in Memphis. Let's Finish Eliza's Run events were held in several towns throughout the country, which just goes to show how big of an impact her death had. A high school cross-country team in Vicksburg, Mississippi even dedicated a race to Liza and wore bright pink headbands in her honor. Then, just the day after Let's Finish Eliza's Run, her funeral was held at Second Presbyterian Church. There were over 300 people in attendance to pay their respects, and a choir performed songs and hymns throughout the service, including, you guessed it, a rendition of "This Little Light of Mine." In her obituary, her family requested that memorials be made to the Eliza Welford Fletcher Memorial Fund at St. Mary's Episcopal School, Christ Methodist Day School, and Second Presbyterian Church. So even after her death, Liza still gave back to her community, which is just really, really beautiful and powerful to think about. Now, while the community and all those who loved Liza were mourning this horrible loss, another brave victim came forward, and I wanted to share more of my thoughts about how quickly police moved in this investigation, but I had those thoughts earlier, but I wanted to wait until we got to this section of the episode before really diving into that. So it turns out that just a year before Liza was killed, another woman named Alicia Franklin accused Cleotha of raping her. And I think it's very important that we include this, that we talk about this, but I do want to warn you, it's extremely upsetting. So what happened was Alicia was on the dating app Plenty of Fish, and that's where she matched with a guy named Cleo. She says that they chatted for a bit, and then they made plans to briefly meet at an apartment complex where he said he was a maintenance worker before getting dinner at Olive Garden. However, when Alicia got to the apartment, she said it looked like it was vacant. Well, it turns out he didn't actually work at this apartment complex, but he actually lived there with his girlfriend and her young kids. And believe it or not, this was the same apartment complex that he would later be arrested at for Liza's murder. But anyways, when Alicia gets there, Cleotha ended up putting a gun to her throat and told her that he'd kill her if she tried to run away. He then put a t-shirt over her head and brought her to his car, where he forced her into the back seat and assaulted her. And to make matters even more horrific, Alicia was actually 4 months pregnant at the time. And despite her begging him to stop, this sick, twisted, worthless fucking monster refused. And if that weren't enough, Alicia faced even more suffering when she attempted to get justice. She had the courage, after going through this surprise, brutal attack, where thankfully she survived. I mean, I feel like it could have been even worse, but she went to the hospital, drove herself there, and was treated there, and also received a sexual assault kit. And I'm very, very proud of her and glad that she did that, because it's not easy to do after going through something as traumatic as that. But she also spoke to authorities and was able to provide a detailed description of what had happened to her. She shared his name, the dating profile, phone number, described his car, and the location of the crime scene. She even left the hospital with authorities and took them right to the apartment complex, yet the officers took no physical evidence from the scene. The police did do a photo lineup with her, but the photo they used was over 10 years old, so she wasn't able to identify him. And they did tell her that they were going to do another photo lineup with a more updated photo, but surprise, surprise, they just never did. And even though she did everything right here and supplied them with everything they could possibly need to get her justice, I mean, this should have been a slam dunk, right? They didn't take it seriously, and justice was not served. And for months, Alicia would regularly check in with the police. She would call them trying to ask for updates, and they were extremely dismissive with her about why an arrest was taking so long. And in an interview, she later said, "I was just an average Black girl in the city of Memphis, you know? I just think it wasn't a priority." And I think most of us with a functioning brain and just awareness in the true crime space in general or the news can agree with her there, right? I mean, I'm very confident in saying she absolutely was not a priority. Countless women, and in most instances, women of color, are treated as though their cases and their trauma just isn't a priority, which is fucked up for so many reasons. I mean, not only is it unfair and dangerous and dehumanizing to a victim, but it also allows monsters like Cleotha to continue offending. And that's exactly what happened here. In Alicia's case, authorities had her rape kit for months. They had everything they needed. And had they tested it in just a reasonable amount of time, they would have been able to have the proof that they needed to arrest Cleotha. But instead, and this is going to enrage you, but that kit just sat in storage for 10 months. I mean, there's just no possible excuse for that. They did finally test it in June of 2022, but the official results weren't returned until September 5th. And if you haven't already put two and two together, that is 3 days after Liza was killed. Just imagine if they had tested it as fast as they tested that champion sandal. Liza would still be here, and Cleotha would have been in jail before any of this could have ever happened. And I know there are some people that will try to make excuses and defend law enforcement and whatever. I really don't understand why anyone would do that, because you just cannot ignore the reality that here we have one case where a missing white woman gets immediate attention of local and federal authorities. And in that instance, DNA gets processed in 24 hours, which is fantastic, should happen all the time. And then in the other case, we have a Black woman who can provide explicit details of her assault with proof of what happened to her. And it took months before anything was done about it. And I want to be so clear here that Liza absolutely deserved every ounce of the effort that was poured into her case. And I wish all cases could get the same attention and urgency. But Alicia deserved that same attention and urgency, and she didn't even get a fraction of that. It wasn't until September 9th of 2022 that he was finally charged with aggravated rape and aggravated kidnapping related to what happened to her. It just makes me sick that she had to go through all of that, and at the end of the day, even though she did do everything right, how grossly mishandled her case was. And unfortunately, it just gets worse. So Alicia, and I'm damn proud of her for this, ended up bringing a lawsuit against the city of Memphis, which basically accused them of negligence, which I hope we can all agree absolutely applies here. But what's infuriating is the city filed to dismiss the suit, saying they, quote, did not owe a duty to Miss Franklin to investigate her rape. They actually said that. That's right. You heard that right. They also said that imposing this general duty to investigate by the courts would infringe upon the Memphis police's constitutional rights to direct the use of limited police resources. And as much as I have tried to understand what they were trying to say in that statement, I don't know what the fuck any of that means. And what makes it even worse is the judge agreed. So in 2023, Alicia's lawsuit was dismissed. The good news here, though, is there was still a trial, and thankfully that did go in her favor. It started in April of 2024, and it lasted 3 days, but in the end, despite the defense trying to pull some incredibly offensive accusations, including that this was about prostitution, the jury found Cleotha guilty. In the end, he was sentenced to 40 years for aggravated rape, 20 years for kidnapping, and another 20 years for having a firearm while being a convicted felon, all of which would be served consecutively. And I'm sure this won't be surprising, but Alicia's assault wasn't the only crime that Cleotha had committed during the time leading up to Eliza's murder. He was actually a suspect in 4 other crimes between July of 2021 and September of 2022. Those crimes included robbery, embezzlement, and identity fraud. The good news is the justice system actually saw him for what he truly is, which is a monster. On January 25th, 2023, he was indicted by a grand jury on the charges of first-degree murder, aggravated kidnapping, and tampering with evidence. And on February 3rd, he pleaded not guilty. His trial was originally set for the end of 2024, but that ended up changing when the DA announced that they were going to seek the death penalty. But ironically, Mr. Bad and Brave over here didn't want to die, so he did end up changing his plea to guilty. That way, he would get life in prison instead of facing the death penalty, and Liza's family was actually supportive of this agreement. So ultimately, in October of 2024, Cleotha officially pleaded guilty to her murder and was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. And during the hearing, he reportedly kept his head down and remained expressionless, emotionless, which doesn't really surprise me because he's a little bitch. But it breaks my heart for Liza's family that he couldn't even offer any ounce of remorse or emotion or feelings. I mean, the dude is straight up evil. Now, as for Liza's family, they were in court for every hearing on the case, and I wanted to read a statement that they released about Cleotha through the DA. It states, "We have no idea what happened to you to turn you into someone so filled with a desire to hurt people. Whatever it was, it does not excuse or explain what you have done. You have changed our lives forever, and nothing will ever be the same. You murdered Liza, even though she did nothing to deserve it. She did not hurt you. In fact, she would have been the first to help if you needed it." Which that last part is so powerful, and I couldn't agree more. I mean, based on everything I know about Liza, I absolutely think she would have been the first to help him if he ever needed it. And as much as I hate to say it, this situation isn't that unique, and I'm sure many of you know that. I mean, in the years leading up to Liza's murder, there were many similar incidents. And just to name a few of them, in 2018, Wendy Martinez was fatally stabbed 7 times on a jog in the Washington, D.C. area, and Molly Tibbetts was abducted and murdered while out running in Brooklyn, Iowa. Then in 2020, Sydney Sutherland was abducted and murdered while out for a run in Jackson County, Arkansas. And of course, this doesn't just happen to female runners. In 2020, a case I'm sure most of you hopefully are familiar with, Ahmaud Arbery was horrifically murdered in a racially motivated crime while out for a jog in Georgia. And just listen to these stats. In 2023, the company Adidas conducted a survey of 9,000 runners about running safety. And in that survey, 38% of those who identified as female say they have experienced physical or verbal abuse while out on a run. In a 2019 survey conducted by the nonprofit Stop Street Harassment, found that 68% of women have reported being harassed in public spaces like streets, trails, and parks. And a 2021 study conducted by Runner's World showed that female runners have had to take action by changing their habits out of fear of what could happen to them. Among the results, 47% of respondents say that they run with their phones. 15% say they run in baggy clothes to avoid unwanted attention, and 37% say they limit their runs to only daylight hours. And of course, if you're a runner, I'm not saying this to scare you, and I wish I don't know. It's such a difficult thing because I wish the world was so different. I think it's important to be aware if you're going to run outside and practice running outdoors as safely as you can. And as someone who covers these cases all the time and just knows a lot about crimes, there's a reason why I run inside. And I really hope that doesn't discourage anyone from running outside, because I know that it is a huge part of the passion for so many. And I wish this was not the reality of the world that we live in, but unfortunately, this is the world that we live in. Runners and everyone else deserves to leave their house without the fear that something horrible could possibly happen to them, that they won't make it home to their families. But I didn't want to just leave you with the doom and gloom and fear of it all. I think it's important to talk about and bring awareness to. But I wanted to leave you with some positive notes as well. And so there are some running organizations that are working to combat these issues. Trailblaze Hers is an inclusive running group based in Boston that aims to empower all women to feel safe while running in neighborhoods. They have annual events like Take Back the Night, which I actually went to every year when I was in college. And that event is to highlight women's safety in numbers, as well as the Bra Run, which is a group run that invites women to join in their sports bra to help them feel comfortable running in public. There's also Girl Trek, Trek, which is a national movement encouraging Black women to walk and run in their communities to promote health and safety. And then there's Rising Hearts, which is an Indigenous-led organization that works to elevate Native communities. And one of their projects is the Running with Purpose Collective, which, according to their website, intersects advocacy and passion for running. Rising Hearts founder, Jordan Daniel, also works to spread safety tips to female runners. And I think community efforts like this are just so important and such a strong way to keep runners safe. And I will leave any other good resources that I come across, as well as information about all of these organizations in the show notes or description box. And I really think that part of Liza's legacy is making sure that we have these discussions about runners' safety and promoting actions to them. And of course, another part of her legacy is Let's Finish Eliza's Run, which is something that they have continued to hold every few years since her death, which I think is beautiful. And God, if I ever have the opportunity, I would love to go to one of those events. And this is really cool. One of the organizers said that the first run was about grief, but the second year was about healing, saying, quote, "Some days are a little harder than others, but every day is a day forward." And then also, after her abduction on their campus, the University of Memphis received $5 million in funding to go towards enhancing security measures, which actually wasn't the only measurement the government took after this case. For starters, a newly elected Shelby County commissioner started a campaign called Shine Blight. And yes, that's Shine Blight, not bright. And they aim to organize and clean neglected lawns similar to the abandoned lot where Liza was found. This project cost about $100,000 and aimed to enhance an area of Memphis which has long been neglected. And you may have already figured this out, but the reason they named it Shine Blight was actually a nod to the song This Little Light of Mine. And they used blight instead of bright because the project was specifically for blighted homes, which just means deteriorated. And another thing that Liza's case did, and Alicia's, was shine light on the problem with untested rape kits. A few weeks after Liza's murder, Tennessee Governor Bill Lee and other legislative leaders announced that they were going to fast track more money to hire 25 additional forensic lab workers throughout the state. And after pressure from lawmakers and detectives, the TBI announced that it planned to hire 50 more forensic employees. They also planned to offer overtime to their lab workers, keep labs open on the weekends, which is huge, and outsource kits to private labs, because they had actually stated that the delays in testing was due to staffing shortages. So this was obviously aimed at helping to speed things up. And obviously this is just a start. We need to see this on a bigger scale nationwide and worldwide, but hey, a start is a start. And the Tennessee legislature also passed a law requiring the TBI to release quarterly reports on kit testing times. And since the end of 2022, the TBI's turnaround time for testing has gone from 44 weeks to 27 weeks. Still not fast enough, but hey, it's something. I guess the goal they're working towards is 8 to 12 weeks, so they've certainly got a ways to go, but it's just awesome to see something being done in a world where it feels like nothing is ever being done. This case also drew attention to decisions on which prisoners should be released early. Even though Cleotha had multiple prison infractions, 53 to be exact, he was released several years earlier than his original sentence because of sentencing credits for good behavior. So two groups, Families Against Mandatory Minimums and the People for Enforcement of Rape Laws, sent an open letter to Governor Bill Lee requesting an investigation into the untested kits and Cleotha's release. And in May of 2023, a bill was passed to create a board that would determine which prisoners should be given sentencing credits based on good behavior and which previously given sentencing credits should be revoked upon review. At the end of the day, the reality is if Cleotha had served his full sentence, Liza would still be here. She would be with her family. She'd still be teaching her students. And in that time, they would have realized that he was guilty of assaulting Alicia, and he likely would have never been released to begin with. It's just such a massive failure that I'll truly never understand. But it's just so important that we continue to carry on Liza's legacy, which the Memphis community certainly has been doing so beautifully. In 2023, Liza's alma mater, the Hutchinson School, awarded the inaugural Liza Welford Fletcher No. 5 Award. Rather than retiring the number she had when she played on the soccer team, they are now awarding her number to a junior player at the end of the season to wear during their senior year, which I thought was so special. The school said it's awarded to a player leader who emulates the ideals of Hutchinson athletics that Liza so beautifully demonstrated. In addition to striving for athletic excellence, she will demonstrate the kind of character, integrity, and leadership that Liza personified. And I know I've mentioned a lot already, but I had to mention this too. Another really cool thing that is being done is that the University of Memphis announced that it would be building a new soccer and track field complex that would be dedicated to Liza and named the Eliza Fletcher Stadium. It's going to be a state-of-the-art facility for the university's men and women's soccer and also track and field teams. It's going to roll out in several phases, and phase 1 is estimated to cost $7 million. And I'm definitely going to link the page below so that you guys can check it out for yourself because it's really cool what they're going to do. But St. Mary's Episcopal School also wanted to build something in her memory. So last year, very recently, they announced that they're going to be building a new library called Liza's Library. They plan to create a tree design in the space, which is such a cool way to honor her love for the outdoors. And I know this has been a long episode, and I think it's been full of a lot of really important information. So thank you to the real ones out there who stayed through the entire thing. But before I go, I wanted to end by sharing parts of a statement that her family once made. Liza meant so much to so many, and her smile radiated happiness, energy, and comfort. Her husband, her children, her parents, her brother, the rest of her family, her friends, her students, her school families, her fellow teachers, her church community, and so many others were moved by countless examples of her faith, kindness, and compassion. This entire case just really got to me. I mean, every single element of it, and Alicia's story too. I mean, these completely random and senseless acts of violence are so hard to wrap your mind around. And I mean, every case I cover, I feel this way, it's always hard to wrap your mind around this type of violence and evil that exists among us. And it's very scary, but there was something about Liza's story that really sort of broke me. Her light really did just seem to shine so bright, which going back to this little light of mine, I mean, she certainly had, I don't know if she had a little light. I feel like she had a really, really big light. And I'm so glad so many people got to bask in that light. I just really think the world needs more people like her, especially needs more teachers like her. And it's so devastating and so unnecessary. She was so kind, so well-intentioned, and really cared about the future generation. And it's a loss that is so hard to recover from. And my heart just truly, truly goes out to everyone who knew her and loved her and has to live the rest of their lives without her light. It's so heartbreaking. But that is going to be it for me today, you guys. I definitely want to hear your thoughts on this case and everything that we talked about today. Especially, I want to hear from those of you who are runners and how these cases make you feel, or any tips that you have. And I hope it didn't scare anyone, the things I was talking about. I'm certainly not trying to, make anyone's fear worse. And I really do want to gather the bravery to run outside myself, because it does look awesome. And I know there was a reason that Liza loved doing it so much. But yeah, it's a scary world we live in, man. That's all I'll say. But yeah, that's going to be it for me today, guys. And I'll be back next week to discuss another case. And until then, stay safe out there. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of True Crime with Kendall Ray. Thank you so much, as always, for joining me. And if you're new to the show, then welcome. I'm so happy to have you here. And make sure to subscribe so you never miss an upload from me. And I'd love to have you here more often. So today I'm going to be telling you guys about a maddening case, just absolutely ridiculous, makes zero sense. I'm going to be talking about the murder of Colleen Rebello. And what's so frustrating about this case, I mean, there are many, many reasons why it's frustrating. It was ridiculous, so unnecessary, makes zero sense. The killer is an idiot. But what's really so frustrating about this is Colleen did absolutely nothing to deserve this. She was a wonderful person from everything I've heard about her, an incredible mother who only wanted to do right by her children. And I think one thing that you guys are going to take away from this case, the way that I have, and it's, something that most of us know at this point, but oftentimes the way that people portray themselves online is very misleading, very inaccurate to what is actually going on. It's not always how it seems, not always as perfect as it seems, especially when it comes to the classic influencer who's trying to display this perfect life. I think this is something that most people know by now, that a lot of what we see from influencers or people who are, trying to sell this vision of the perfect life, and it's very aesthetic and seems like they have it all. I think people have realized that most of the time that is fake. It's a highlight reel and that you're only really seeing the best. I mean, no one's going to post their troubling times. Well, some people do, and credit to them for real. The ones that are shifting more into showing the reality of their lives. If you're going to share, I mean, that's definitely the way to do it, in my opinion. And normally I start out by telling you more about the victim, and I will get into that here shortly. But I wanted to start today by telling you a bit more about one of her sons, Andre. You're going to be hearing a lot about Andre in this episode, and I think it's important that you get a little context on him and his situation before I tell you more about Colleen and what happened to her. So Andre Rebello was one of Colleen's two middle children, and homeboy was a self-proclaimed crypto bro, which I think probably tells you a lot about him right off the bat. He portrayed himself to be a decently successful cryptocurrency trader, and he made it appear that he had this insanely luxurious life. And of course, one of the ways that he portrayed this is through social media, but not necessarily his own. It was actually through his girlfriend, Gracie Piscopo's account, that the world got to see their so-called wealth. Now, a little bit more on Gracie. She was and still is an Australian-based influencer with over 1 million followers on Instagram and just over 300,000 subscribers on YouTube. And by 2020, she and Andre had been together for about 8 years, and they lived in a big family home just a few miles away from Colleen with their 2-year-old son. And between the luxury trips and the designer clothing, the house, which was like all white and perfect looking, this giant fireplace and, all the things, plus their Range Rover. I mean, anyone who looked at their content back then would assume that they really did have it all, which is exactly what they wanted people to think. And in fairness to Gracie, this is kind of the classic model for influencers. I mean, it's how a lot of influencers are successful, that they share this lifestyle that a lot of people couldn't imagine even having and aspire to have. And it's just kind of like eye candy to see it all. And I think that's how people like that rack up so many followers, is it's like people living vicariously through them are just curious about what it would be like to live that way. And if you were someone who followed Gracie, and maybe some of you out there are, maybe you believed that she and Andre really had it all. The whole influencer cryptocurrency power couple vibe was strong. And they also were doing family vlogging, including their kids in their content, or their son. Actually, they only had one child. And I have a lot of thoughts on that. If you've ever watched my other podcast, The Sesh, that's where I talk a lot more about that. I am highly, highly against people putting their kids, especially in video, when it's monetized. I think there's a giant problem with that. That's totally a conversation for another day. I'm sure a lot of you agree with me. So, I have my issues with them for doing that on its own, but that's really irrelevant to what we're talking about today, because it gets so much worse than that. And eventually Andre really became Gracie's business manager, you could say. So they were really giving off this dynamic duo power couple energy. But in the height of what happened to Colleen, I do believe the internet and influencing was a lot less transparent. But keeping up with their appearance was certainly important to Andre. I mean, he went to extremes to keep it up. So with all of that in mind, now that you have a bit more backstory on those two, and we will be talking more about all of that later on as well, let's talk about his mom, Colleen. And I think you'll be equally upset and pissed off as I am about how all of this played out, and honestly just shocked. How the killer did this is just next level stupidity. Makes absolutely no sense. I have no idea what he was thinking. It is just insane. So let's go back in time to 2020. Imagine what it was like, right? The pandemic was kicking off. Crazy times. And at the time, Colleen Rebello was a 58-year-old single mother of 4 living in Perth, Australia. And her other 3 kids are named Julian, Monique, and Fabian. And by 2020, all of them were adults. However, Monique and Fabian were still living at home at this time, which is a small but somewhat important detail. Now, as for Monique, she had moved in temporarily while she was training to become a paramedic. And Fabian was 19, so I'm guessing he hadn't quite moved out yet. And from what I was able to learn, Colleen was really the type of mom who would do anything for her kids and really wanted to make sure that they lived the best lives possible and would do everything in her power to make sure that they, had everything that they needed in life. And I'm not too sure about her ex-husband's role in the kids' lives. There wasn't much information out there about that, but I do know that the divorce was pretty bitter. I also know that they had been divorced for quite some time and that she really seemed to be doing most of the parenting by herself. But once her kids were mostly grown up and much more self-sufficient, pretty much all of them had left the nest, she was able to really start prioritizing herself again. And by 2019, she was enrolled in a master's program for health administration at Murdoch University, which I think is so cool when people go back to school later in life, especially to get a master's degree. I mean, it's definitely not easy after years of being out of school. It's a super, super challenging thing to take on. So lots of respect to her for that. And she even started a new job at the health department in May of 2020, which she was super excited about. But sadly, Colleen never got the chance to live this new life, to start this next chapter for herself, because on May 25th, it was all brutally taken away from her for absolutely no reason. And that day started out super, super normal. At 10 a.m., Colleen drove her son Fabian to work at their local supermarket, and she was planning on picking him up when his shift ended at 2. But when 2 o'clock rolled around, she was nowhere to be seen. And that was very, very unlike Colleen. She, as far as I have heard, really always showed up for her kids, and that was very out of the norm for her. So Fabian starts texting her, calling her, hoping that there was probably just some type of miscommunication about when his shift was over. But he never ended up getting in touch with her, never heard from her, so he decided to just walk home instead. And of course, at the time, he thought that was a little strange, unlike her, but he wasn't freaked out yet. However, the panic really started to set in once he got home. Because when he got there, he could hear that the shower was running, but there was no reply when he called out his mom's name. He even went as far as knocking on the bathroom door in case maybe she couldn't hear him over the sound of the water. But he was met with total silence, so he made the decision to open the door himself. And that's when he found his mother slumped down, unresponsive in the shower, which I feel so bad that he had to be the one to see her like that, to walk into a scene like that, completely shocked, not understanding at all what had happened. And of course, he immediately calls 000, which if you didn't know is the equivalent to 911 in Australia. And he also attempted to do CPR, but despite everyone's best efforts, it was too late to save Colleen. She was gone. Now, to call this discovery shocking just honestly doesn't do it justice, because Colleen, she did have a few health-related concerns, but by no means was she experiencing anything that's serious or fatal. She had osteopenia, which is just low bone density, as well as Hashimoto's disease, which is a thyroid condition. I have it myself. It's very common and very manageable. So neither of those things would have killed her. Generally speaking, she was actually very healthy for her age. She really took care of herself, did a lot of exercise, and for her to have just suddenly collapsed in the shower, it was shocking and just made no sense to anyone. And for the first couple of weeks, there weren't really any answers. Everyone was just totally confused. And the coroner wasn't able to pinpoint an exact cause of death. So they ultimately ruled that she died of natural causes. But let me tell you, and I'm sure you have already guessed by now, there was nothing natural about Colleen's death. And it's actually thanks to an insurance company that any of this was figured out. And it turns out that in the weeks following their mother's death, Andre was acting, I'll call it suspicious. And for context, Julian, the oldest sibling, was the only one who didn't live in Perth. So he had to fly in after their mother's death, and he did plan to stick around for a few weeks to sort of, sort out Colleen's affairs and kind of get everything a little bit more organized and stable for the family. And he was the executor of her estate, so he was in charge of taking care of everything that they needed to. However, it looked like Andre was starting to take on roles that weren't his. Not only that, but he was doing it all in secret. For example, Julian needed his mother's driver's license for something, but when he went to look for it, it was weirdly missing. Well, come to find out, Andre had taken it, and he told Julian that he had already taken care of whatever he was planning to do. And just being totally honest there, from what I understand, being helpful, helping at all, was pretty out of character for Andre. Plus, it wasn't even his responsibility. It was Julian's. So the whole thing started to rub Julian the wrong way. And I think it would rub anyone the wrong way in that situation, right? And this is wild and incredibly stupid, but Andre also started having his mother's mail forwarded to his house, even though both his brother and sister were still living there. So that was, red flag number one. And that really only scratches the surface of his weirdness, which I will be getting more into, but pretty soon it was clear why. It turns out that this wealthy, I have it all lifestyle that was being portrayed on social media wasn't what it appeared to be. Because Andre wasn't a successful cryptocurrency bro. Gracie was actually the real breadwinner of the family, which, to be clear, is totally fine. In fact, I think it's great. But it's more so the fact that Andre wasn't who he was portraying himself to be. Now, I'm not entirely sure how aware Gracie was of their financial situation, but they certainly weren't raking in the dough the way that you might assume if you were to look at their social media, look at their YouTube, look at all their photos. It definitely seemed like things were going well for them, but that was far from the truth. She was pulling in a few $1,000s per Instagram post, which is pretty crazy. And she actually had one brand deal that paid her upwards of $80,000, which blew my mind. That is just insane money. But the amount that they were bringing in was actually less than they were spending, which tends to be a big problem, right? When you're living beyond your means, especially when it's to keep up this perfect life, this appearance online, and keep selling that to others. Now, I have read that the highest amount of money that Andre had made in crypto was $22. Yeah, that's right. Which, no shame in that. I mean, if you're getting into something, it starts small, of course, and I don't know anything about crypto. But given what they were trying to portray, I do find that to be humorous. But he was telling Gracie that they were about to come into a significant amount of money. But the reality was they were in debt, $112,000 to be exact. Some of it was his and some of it was hers. So it's possible that she knew a little bit, but as far as what Andre was doing to get them out of debt, Gracie truly had no idea. All we do know for certain, though, is that their bills were just not being paid, and debt collectors were starting to metaphorically knock on their door, which you really would have never known if you had just seen their pictures, their social media, and their videos. It really did look like they had it all, but the truth is, they had no assets in their names, and the walls were really starting to close in. And at least for Andre, the pressure was really starting to mount. And so what did he do? He took out 3 life insurance policies in his mother's name, totaling more than $1 million, and then killed her to access that money. Which there's so much to unpack there, right? I have so many thoughts. First of all, that killing your mother seems like the best solution to you, other than just maybe getting into a different field, working hard, trying to work your way out of the debt and maintain your lifestyle. It seems like there's many other better options than killing your loving mother who had always been good to you your whole life. And then I also think about, as a mom, it's hard to even wrap your mind around the idea of birthing a child, raising them, and then they are the one in the end to take your life. Now, it's hard to say exactly when his big idea here, his big plan, his plot truly started. But like I said, it was an insurance company that figured it out. Because when Andre started to inquire about that money, things weren't really adding up. So one of the insurance agencies who he had a $500,000 policy under decided to notify the police. And when they started looking into things, it became pretty clear that Colleen had nothing to do with it. It turns out Andre had purchased all 3 policies less than a week before his mom died, and he was listed as the sole beneficiary. Now, why he thought that this would work, I mean, truly, what a fucking idiot to take out these policies a week before he murders her. And I know I haven't even explained what he did, and I will get there, but I just was blown away that he really thought he wouldn't get caught taking out those policies just a week out. It's insane. And it wasn't like he just got policies for everyone in his life. It was just for his mother. They also learned that he created a fake email, forged copies of her death certificate, her last will and testament, as well as forged the coroner's report. And of course, he also made it so he was the sole beneficiary of everything in her estate, leaving absolutely nothing to his brothers and sisters. And the way that Andre did this was very cold and also incredibly calculated. Apparently, he even used this online AI software so that he could pose as his mom's psychologist. Yes, you heard me right there. He posed as his mom's psychologist. Of course, when he reached out to the insurance company, they obviously wanted to see her medical records, including her mental health history, just to make sure there wasn't any concern for her unaliving herself. And he did try to get this woman to give him his mom's medical records, but of course she refused. So he not only used that fake email and sent a forged medical report, but he also used a fake voice generator and left a voicemail for the insurance company pretending to be the psychologist. And this dude literally Googled fake voice generator and best online deepfake voice. And the insurance company, of course, also asked for a copy of the death certificate to confirm her cause of death. But when Andre was told that that could take up to 9 months, he created his own and wrote down that she had died of a brain aneurysm. He literally just made that up and thought this was going to work. And then this dumbass literally forged the signature of the coroner. Now just take a look at Andre, right? He's a good-looking guy conventionally, but as you can see, there's not a whole lot of thought going on behind those eyes. And by the way, it's believed that he called the coroner's office multiple times pretending to be his brother because he was listed as Colleen's next of kin, which I imagine he did that so that he could receive updates on her autopsy. I mean, that's the only thing that makes sense. And I'm not 100% sure how this happened. I'm guessing it was when he forged her will. But Colleen's remains ended up being cremated even though she wanted to be buried. He, even in her death, had no respect for her wishes, no care for her at all. He just really wanted to use her for money and get rid of the evidence as quick as he could. So in October of 2020, they end up bringing in Andre for questioning. And actually, they brought in all of his siblings, and it was super clear that none of them were aware of what he had done, at least not the full extent of it. His sister Monique, for example, had actually heard from the psychologist who just straight up asked her why documents were submitted on her behalf. And at the time, Monique was super confused and had no way to explain that. And she actually went ahead and asked Andre what the psychologist was talking about, and he told her that she must have mixed up patients. So they knew pretty early on that something was off here, something was really weird, but they didn't really see the whole picture. But of course, when they were brought in for questioning, they all started to see that picture very clearly because it was that very same day that they were questioned that Andre ended up being arrested on several fraud charges. And they also had executed search warrants on both his house and his mother's house, during which they collected a bunch of electronic devices. Now, they found some pretty incriminating information on his devices specifically, which I will get into later on. But as for Gracie, they were confident that she had no involvement. In fact, investigators ended up installing a listening device in their bedroom and living room between September and December, just to be sure. So that device was in there before he was arrested, and they kept it in there after he posted bail. And they did this to, see if they would say anything that implicated her in any of this. And even though at first they were mainly listening for any fraud-related conversations, they now were starting to believe that Colleen's death was pretty suspicious. And they were also listening to hear if he said anything about that. But all in all, there was nothing that pointed to Gracie being involved. I mean, she seemed to be absolutely shocked and, quite frankly, pissed at him for what he did. And that's before she actually knew the full extent of what he did. She could be heard saying things like, "What have you done? You put us into so much shit. And why would you do that?" To which he assured her that everything would be okay. He was basically like, "Don't worry about it, baby. This is a giant misunderstanding. And we're going to be back to living our fancy life and sharing it with the masses before you know it." And I guess she was mostly worried about him going to jail and having to become a single parent. And I totally get that. I mean, that's a very valid fear to have. And Andre told her that he wasn't going to jail. And again, I have to reiterate, at this point, Gracie had no idea what he had actually done. She was just concerned about the fraud element and how that was going to affect them. But he said he was going to get his money and then leave the country before anything bad happened, before he was arrested and she ended up having to be a single mom. To be clear, though, he didn't do that. He ended up staying in Perth for the next 2 years and was living almost as if nothing had happened. And obviously he still was facing the fraud charges, but things were moving slowly, which I have to imagine the reason it was moving so slowly is because they were also starting to put the pictures together and were looking into him for the murder of his mother. And so by November of 2022, investigators were confident that they had enough to make an arrest. So that month, he was arrested and taken back into custody on the charge of first-degree murder. And here's what they ultimately think happened. When investigators started to dig into Andre's finances, they saw what I already explained to you, that they were living well beyond their means. And he was in a very significant amount of debt. And they think that he lied to Gracie about how much money they had and continuously, fed into a false narrative that he was earning money in crypto. And they think that he lied to her and said that he was about to come into a bunch of money, but it wasn't actually going to be from crypto. Instead, it was going to be his mom's life insurance money that he had planned to collect after murdering her. And it was money, of course, from those 3 policies that he had taken out fraudulently less than a week before she died. And to help prove this, investigators pointed to the fact that between December of 2019 and July of 2020, Andre had deleted almost his entire internet search history. Which again, this guy is such a fucking idiot, right? I mean, he really thought you can just delete it and it's gone and no one's ever going to see it. It blows my mind that 2020 beyond, or even before that, people think that that is how it works, that you can just delete it and it's gone and investigators are never going to find it. Nice, bro. Super, super smart. Because, yeah, some of those searches were recovered, and they found that he was looking up things like coroner's aneurysm causes, which this suggested that he may have been plotting his mom's murder as early as 5 months before he actually did it. And they also pointed to the fact that Andre was at his mom's house in the time frame it was believed she was killed. Just listen to this. On May 25th of 2020, Andre had made plans to go get lunch with Gracie and Gracie's cousins who happened to be visiting. However, sometime in the late morning, Andre just sort of vanished. He didn't tell anyone he was leaving. He didn't tell her. And he also wasn't responding to any of her texts or calls. And she was frantically trying to reach him. I mean, believe me, she truly tried. Between 11:10 and 11:34, she called him a dozen times and left several angry text messages saying things like, "Answer your fucking phone. Where are you? Oh my God, I swear to God, Andre, do you not have a phone? What is wrong with you? Answer for fuck's sake. I am fuming at you. I'm so angry." But all of these messages went unanswered. And it wasn't until about an hour later, around 12:30-ish, that Andre did use his phone, and he used it to text his mom. And he wanted to know if she would be around to watch his son either that day or the following day because he had to go run some errands. And it's pretty obvious what he was doing here. I'm sure all of you have already put the pieces together. He is trying to set the scene that he believed his mother was alive and is reaching out to her like normal and just kind of cover his tracks, right? And soon investigators and eventually prosecutors suggested the same, that he was trying to cover his tracks and make it seem like he had no idea his mother had died. And then at some point that day, and sources on this case aren't super consistent about exactly when, but at some point he just strolled on into their house and acted completely normal, like he hadn't just gone completely dark and ghosted her for all of that time. He just casually walked in and asked where Gracie and her cousin wanted lunch, as if everything was totally normal. Now, apparently it wasn't totally out of character for him to have his phone on silent, but this wasn't like the other instances where he would keep his phone on silent. Investigators believe it was on silent so that he could follow through with his plan and stay focused, right? And not have any trace of where he was at that time. However, that didn't really work so well for him because his phone did end up pinging on a cell tower that was right by Colleen's house in the time frame that it was believed she was murdered. And not only that, his super luxe white Range Rover was actually seen outside of her house approximately when investigators think that she died. And this is interesting too. Colleen's sister actually lived nearby and drove by the house in that same time frame and remembered seeing his car out front. And when you think about it, even though the autopsy couldn't definitively point to a cause of death, there really isn't another explanation. There were no signs of a break-in to suggest that a stranger killed her, and she had nothing medically that would point to her death being accidental. Plus, unaliving herself just was not on the table, at least according to her psychologist. And these were all things that were pointed out during his trial. So let's talk about that. When Andre was arrested in November of 2022, he, not surprisingly, pleaded not guilty. And because of the seriousness of the charge, he ended up being denied bail. So he sat waiting for his trial to start, which began in November of 2024. And this trial was actually supposed to be for both the fraud charges and the murder charge. They ended up just combining it all into one. However, just before trial began, Andre ended up confessing to the fraud, or at least some of it. Basically, what happened was he said that he did forge all those documents and pretended to be the psychologist, but not for the reasons that they were saying. This idiot tried to say that leading up to his mom's death, she had actually asked him to help her get life insurance. He claimed that she was worried about approaching 60 and wanted to have life insurance to protect her kids and her grandkids, which that part isn't suspicious. That's very normal. But she also supposedly told him that she was nervous about COVID and a family history of cancer. So this was just a layer of protection for her loved ones. Now, as for how he explained why she would ask him to do it, Andre said that it was because he was tech savvy. Of course, as a crypto bro who earns like $20, super tech savvy. But anyway, according to him, she thought that he would be able to help her to get the best deal. And then he said that the reason he had created that email in her name had something to do with Gmail being easier for her to use, and that he got her 3 policies from 3 different agencies because that's how he could get her the most coverage. And obviously everything he's saying here is a total load of shit, but this is legitimately what he was trying to say was the reality. It's just comical that he really tried to push that narrative. But why forge everything after the fact? Well, according to Andre, he said that he believed his mother took her own life. And he knew that if she did, they never would have gotten the money. Because he knew, of course, that her policy wouldn't cover that. So everything he did was in his version of the story to protect his siblings. What a nice guy. And he said that he didn't want them to know that their mom did this to herself and wanted to be sure that they all got their money. But let's not forget here that Mr. Andre did list himself as the sole beneficiary. So that's, not lining up with everything else he's trying to push here. But don't worry though, he did have an explanation for that too. He said that he thought only one person could be the beneficiary. So he was totally planning on giving them their money afterwards, but he had to put himself as the sole beneficiary because that's just how he understood it had to be done, okay? Yet, of course, that never happened. But for as much as he was admitting to, which he admitted to on the stand when he testified, he adamantly denied killing her. Here's what really trips me up, though. This was all stuff that he denied when they were originally questioning him. And they actually played that interview for the jury, the one where he said he didn't commit fraud. And if he lied once, who's to say that he's not lying again? And plus, let's be honest, this news story just doesn't make any sense. Why wouldn't he just immediately tell his siblings about the policies if it was as innocent of an explanation as he was now claiming, right? And he said that it just didn't come up, but I'm sorry, why not bring it up? Also, why wouldn't he tell anyone that he was with her right before she died? I mean, that would be something you would tell your siblings immediately, right? And remember how I said he went AWOL, just disappeared for a bit that morning and his phone pinged at her house? Well, since there was so much proof that he was there, he just couldn't reasonably deny that at this point. So instead, he tells the jury this story about going over there to have coffee with his mom. And this dummy really thought that the jury was actually going to believe that she coincidentally just died shortly after you had your nice little coffee with your mom. I mean, come on, dude. Why are you even trying to sell this bullshit? The whole thing was just insane. And he really did have an excuse for absolutely everything. Not good excuses, but he had prepared excuses. And the thing is he was so sloppy and made several key mistakes, particularly as related to staging her body. When Colleen's body was found, she was still wearing all of her jewelry and her hair was still up in a ponytail or bun. And there wasn't even like a bath mat or a towel down outside of the shower, which suggested that she wasn't planning on showering. And I know I've already said this a few times now, but Colleen really was a healthy person. She exercised a lot. She really took good care of herself. And this was actually proven in the testimony from her doctor during the trial. Now, the defense pointed out that Colleen did have a slight abnormality in her heart. So, of course, they tried to suggest that her cause of death could have been from cardiac arrhythmia, which technically can be fatal, yes, but the whole undetermined cause of death thing goes both ways. The coroner might not have been able to say definitively that she was murdered, but he couldn't definitively say that she wasn't. Plus, it's worth mentioning that she had bruises on her hands, her arms, her shin, her knee, as well as blood spots on her eyes that were consistent with suffocation. Granted, some of these wounds were already healed pretty much, suggesting that a few of them were unrelated. But yeah, it's hard to imagine that this was just a coincidence, right? There's just no way. And the testimony from Andre's siblings really pointed to the fact that all his behavior following their mom's death was just not normal. The sudden interest in being involved and going behind their backs to get her mail and all of that is totally fucking weird. And get this, apparently he even spoke to a realtor about selling her home, which, by the way, if you remember from earlier, 2 of his siblings were still living in it. I personally don't understand how any of this could be excused, but I guess when there's an Andre, there's a way. Now, as for Gracie, she took the stand as well, and she was questioned pretty thoroughly and was even accused of trying to protect him. She had initially told investigators that Andre was with her that whole day and never mentioned his little disappearing act. But of course, we know for a fact that this isn't totally true, and her response was basically that she didn't think that information was important at the time, which I do kind of understand to some degree, especially because they were questioning her about fraud and nobody at that point knew anything about a possible murder. And I do feel for her in a lot of ways because the media has really not been kind to her and just people on social media in general. And none of this, in my opinion, is really her fault. I mean, she truly had no idea. But on the stand, she said that she remembered Andre telling her that he was running errands that morning and that he had to drop off a bag of clothes at his mom's house. She also said that he appeared totally ordinary that day. And so it really does genuinely seem that she was just as blindsided about all of this as everyone else was, but nobody, and I mean nobody, was as blindsided as Colleen had to have been. So in the end, after a 3-week trial, the jury found Andre guilty of first-degree murder. And apparently, this sicko sat there with a raised eyebrow and slight smile on his face, but besides that, he showed zero emotion. And his dad was actually there in court that day to support his son, but none of his siblings were, and I don't blame them. I wouldn't want to be either. What he did is just evil. I mean, beyond unforgivable. And for what? Money? To keep up the facade for social media? To pretend that you're this successful cryptocurrency trader? I don't even know what the official term for that would be, but that was enough for you to kill your mother? It's hard to even wrap your mind around how someone could actually come to that decision. I mean, I bet if he had just asked his mom for help with money, she would have given it to him, even if she herself didn't have that much money. I mean, I'm sure she would have helped him as much as possible. From what I understand, she was an excellent mother who just wanted to do everything she could to support her children. Or at least I think she would have brainstormed a way to help him if she didn't have the money herself. But instead of just admitting the truth about what was going on and asking for help, he did the most cowardly, evil, sick thing a person can do. And that is kill your own mother. And what makes it even sadder is that Colleen had confided in a few people that she was worried about Andre when it came to his so-called business. She just didn't see the longevity in social media and obviously didn't really understand cryptocurrency either. She didn't understand how any of this could support her son and his family for a lifetime. Now, obviously, we know that being an influencer and having a career on social media can be very lucrative. But she's right. For a lot of people, influencing doesn't last forever. And then, yeah, the whole crypto thing, that obviously wasn't working out well. But it really is eerie to think about how on point her intuition was. And I just hate that everything she was concerned about ended up costing her her life. Thankfully, though, Andre was definitely held fully accountable for his actions, and he won't have the opportunity to do this again, or at least I hope not. Because pretty recently, April of 2025, he was sentenced to life in prison, but with the possibility of parole in 25 years. It's hard to imagine that he might walk free one day. He certainly could. Maybe he will. Maybe not. Time will tell. I certainly hope that is not the case. 25 years is not enough. But it is encouraging that his sentence was life in prison. This whole case is just incredibly depressing and upsetting and unnecessary, infuriating. I mean, what a little prick to do that to your own mother, to do that to your siblings, to take her away from everything that she was about to start doing. I mean, she's just getting back into starting this new chapter of her life, and he is that selfish. He takes it all away, and for money, for the facade of the internet, believing that they're, living this dream life. It's sick. How sick do you have to be in the head to think that this is a good option? Colleen deserves so much better than that. His siblings deserve so much better than that. Gracie deserved so much better than Andre, and not to mention, now his son is without a father, although I will say I think he's probably better off without Andre as a father. I wish he could have had a better father than Andre from the beginning, but I'm just glad at the end of the day that hopefully he will spend the rest of his life behind bars regretting his actions. And I hope his mom and what he did to her stays in his mind forever, haunts his dreams, and that he lives the rest of his life miserable. Hey man, maybe you can do some cryptocurrency stuff in jail. Maybe you can teach some classes to the other inmates. I'm sure he'll figure out a way to try and make money because he's sick like that. And that seems like it's all he cares about. But yeah, super frustrating one. Just hard to even imagine what would actually bring you to do something like this to your mother. So sick. I truly send my best to everyone who loved Colleen, all of her family, all of her friends, all of her children, and to Gracie as well, and their son. I don't know if he's still on the internet. I actually didn't look if they've posted anything recently. But yeah, I wish the best for everyone. This is just horribly tragic, and I'm sure has been incredibly traumatic for everyone involved. But really, to Colleen, God, there's no words. The idea of being murdered by your own child is, I don't know. I really can't. I don't know if I even have words. It's so sick. But as always, I want to hear from you guys. Let me know your thoughts on this case. That is going to be it for me today. But I did want to mention, if you are looking for more content from me, I do have 2 other podcasts. I have another true crime, for the most part, true crime show with my husband, and we do a little, other topics here and there too. So it's kind of like a mixed bag. You never really know what you're going to get. But for the most part, we focus on true crime. That is called Mile Higher. It's available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts, as well as YouTube. So I'll have that linked below. And then also my other podcast, The Sesh, where I actually talk a lot about the problems of family vlogging and having your children in monetized content on the internet. So maybe you'd be interested in checking out that. And I also share a lot just about my personal life and stuff like that. It's a really fun show, and I really do it to balance out some of the heavy content that I cover on a weekly basis. But yeah, that's going to be it for me today, guys. I hope you're having a great day and stay safe out there. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of True Crime with Kendall Ray. Thank you so much, as always, for joining me today. And if you're new to the show, then welcome. I'm so happy to have you here, and make sure that you click subscribe so you never miss an upload from me. Okay, guys, so today we're getting into a case that has been hard to even wrap my mind around because it is so ridiculous, completely unnecessary. And as I was researching this case, like as it evolved and I figured out what happened, which I still don't completely understand why the killer did what they did. I think I have like a decent idea, but they never, truly explained it themselves, because I don't know if they even truly knew why, but it is just so completely unnecessary, infuriating, and makes no sense. I'm going to be telling you about the cold-blooded murder of Kevin Jung. And as I was looking into Kevin and who he was, I like him so much. Obviously, I've never met him, but he had a YouTube channel, and that's always a weird thing, in today's day and age, because I'm sure so many of you can relate to sort of forming like parasocial relationships with people online. Like maybe it's on TikTok or like a favorite YouTuber where you feel like you kind of get to know someone. And in a lot of the cases I cover, I don't really get to see video of victims that I speak about. But now more often, there are victims I speak about that have a social presence, have YouTube channels or TikTok accounts. And it just, I don't know, getting to see them in that way and see them as they were in life and thriving makes these cases so much more difficult to cover, but at the same time makes me feel like weirdly connected. I don't know how, I hope that doesn't sound weird, but I really, really like Kevin a lot, and I just can't wrap my head around how this happened. It's infuriating. And Kevin was an Ivy League student. He was very, very driven in life, extremely kind. From everything I've learned about him, he was someone who truly only wanted the best for others. He was positive. He was kind. He was unbelievably smart, too. So Kevin was actually born on Valentine's Day in 1994. And he was an only child to his parents, Linda and Ming Chen. And it's been said that Linda raised him as a single mother, primarily in the Chicago area. Now, Kevin was a very religious person, and it seemed to really shape who he was and shape his life in a lot of ways, and the relationships in his life as well. And in the words of his youth pastor, as a teenager, I guess Kevin was quite a handful. Like a lot of young kids, he had areas where he sort of struggled, but I guess through church and through his relationship with God, he became someone that a lot of others aspired to be. He was honest, kind, intentional, thoughtful, and really led his life in service to God, according to those who knew him. Kevin seemed to really be someone that a lot of people looked up to. And one of the things that I really appreciated about Kevin, just from learning about him, is the love that he had for the environment. Kevin wanted to make the world a better place for everyone and all creatures. And in order to do that, he ended up focusing his education around environmental studies. He first studied at North Seattle College and then went to the University of Washington, where he graduated magna cum laude and with a degree in biology. Now, if that's not impressive enough, he then got accepted into Yale's School of Environment, where in 2019 he started working towards getting his master's in environmental sciences. Now, he was particularly interested in studying the mercury levels in fish in the Quinnipiac River, which is something that he was actively researching. He also helped manufacturing companies comply with local and federal laws, distributed food at a local homeless shelter, mentored young people, and to top it off, he was a long-standing member of the Army National Guard. So quite the resume, right? I mean, Kevin was super, super impressive, and being a member of the Army was a really big part of Kevin's life and his identity, and it's something that he was rightfully very proud of. He was someone who really valued self-improvement. And I think that through the church and through his service, this is something he managed to do a lot of. And another area that he really worked on bettering himself was fitness. It seemed to be a huge passion of his. And like I mentioned earlier, he did have a YouTube channel. I want to link it below. I've checked out a bunch of his videos now. They're everything from fitness to also a little bit of nutrition. And I actually did one of his videos for stretching the lower back to deal with back pain, because I've actually been having a bit of back pain myself, probably due to really bad form when I lift is my guess. But his videos are great. And so I wanted to link his channel in case any of you want to use them. He had this Fitness with Kevin business where he helped coach people along their own journey.
What's up, guys? Welcome to another episode of Fitness with Kevin. I'm Kevin. Today, I'm going to show you how you can fix lower back pain. All right, so the first stretch I'm going to show you is called the single leg over. So you're going to put your hand over here on the bend of your knee, and you can lay your head down on the ground. And I'll show you from the side too. But you're going to go like this. Raise your leg, put your knee here, put your shoulder on the ground. Try to make sure that your shoulder doesn't come off the ground when you're doing this. Just get up and stretch. Do these lower back exercises. It'll really help you from experiencing that pain. And if you like this video, please remember to subscribe. Check out my Facebook page. Thank you so much. I'll see you next time. Peace.
And yeah, that channel that he had is full of really great workout videos, and you can just see his personality and passion shine through in these. But he also has a few other videos that point to some of his other interests. Kevin loved to play the piano and to sing, and he was very, very good. It's really quite beautiful to see.
Wise men say only fools rush in, but I can't help falling in love with you.
And then another thing that I love about Kevin is how much he loved his mom. I think that says so much about a man, and the way that he cared for his mom is so beautiful. There's actually another video posted to his YouTube channel with his mom, and I wanted to share that as well. It's sort of a birthday vlog tribute type kind of video, which I mentioned because his mom was one of, if not the most important person in his life, and that was very clear. She had truly sacrificed everything for him, and there wasn't a day in his life where he didn't appreciate her for all of that. So much so that when he went to Yale, he actually bought a house there and invited his mom, who was living back in Seattle at the time, to come and move in with him. It was his dream to be able to look after her the way that she'd always looked after him. And yeah, I just really feel like this tells you everything you need to know about the type of man that Kevin was. He was selfless, he was authentic, he was incredibly enthusiastic, and he always made people feel welcome and at ease. So when you take all of that, plus the brains, plus the fact that he's very handsome, Kevin was quite a catch, right? And in early 2020, he ended up meeting a girl who shared all of his same values and seemed to be the perfect match for him. Her name is Zion Perry, and when the two of them met, she was an undergrad student at MIT studying molecular biophysics and biochemistry, which are things that I probably couldn't even explain to you what they were if I tried, because I am not on the intelligence level of these two at all. But yeah, she is very, very, very smart. She was also very religious, just like Kevin. And another thing that they really had in common is they both really enjoyed spending time outdoors. And the story of how they met is really sweet, actually. They were both at this Christian retreat, and Zion at first, I guess, wasn't even sure if she wanted to go, but some friends of hers thought it would be good for her. So she went ahead and went, and that's where Kevin was too. And on the third day of the retreat, they were seated adjacent to one another. And I guess at this retreat, everyone was asked to pray for the person next to them. And so they were praying for each other, and they pretty soon became friends. Seemed like it was kind of meant to be. But anyways, they ended up seeing each other again at another retreat in February, and one more time when Zion went to Yale for a PhD program interview. Now, during all of this time, they were just friends. But by May of that year, after talking on the phone for so many weeks and just having so much in common, they decided to give the long distance thing a chance. So for several months, he was living in New Haven, Connecticut, and she was living back home in Pennsylvania, finishing her senior year remotely because of the pandemic. And when he would go and visit her, they almost always did some type of outdoor activity, whether that was hiking, fishing, gardening, you name it. They just loved being outside and seeing the beauty that this world has to offer. And they also loved playing music together, with Kevin on the piano and Zion on the flute. So from everything you're hearing, I'm sure you agree with me that these two really seem to be meant for each other. So Kevin was beyond excited when she told him that she was coming to Yale for her PhD. I guess she had also been considering a school in California, so the fact that she ended up choosing Yale and could be with him was very, very exciting for the two of them, because now they wouldn't have to do long distance anymore, which can be a challenge. I'm sure anyone out there who's done long distance knows it is not easy. Granted, though, Kevin did have to go to Texas for a few weeks for an Army-related training, but once he was back, they were really starting to settle into their new routine. And on January 30th, 2021, exactly 1 year from the day that they met, Kevin proposed to Zion while they were out hiking. His friends say that you can just tell how deeply in love with Zion he was. I mean, it practically radiated out of him, even in the video of their proposal, which I'm not sure if I'm able to play. I will put it in if I can. I think it might be copyrighted, which is strange, but it is so cute, especially at the end when he reaches out to give her this big hug, and you can just tell he's so happy, and she's like very clearly surprised, but also really happy. And God, it's just, they had no idea what was going to happen very shortly after they got engaged, because little did either of them know their engagement would only last a week, because on February 6th, Kevin was shot and killed. Now, in order for all of this to make sense, I need to rewind a little bit here to December of 2020, because that's when multiple shootings were starting to take place. Between December 11th and February 6th, there were 4 separate shooting incidents in the New Haven area. Now, luckily, no one was actually hit during any of these, which is amazing, but there certainly were some close calls. It turns out that some crazy person was just driving around and shooting into the sides of different homes, and they were homes that people were inside of. And the police were able to link them because the same .45 caliber shell casings were found at each of the scenes. And in the last 2 incidents, there were similar reports that the driver was in a dark-colored SUV. And to clarify, Kevin's shooting wasn't the 4th, his was the 5th. But they did happen the exact same day and only an hour apart. However, the 5th, Kevin's, was much more severe. At 8:33 p.m., 911 was called by several witnesses who had overheard the sound of gunshots, and when emergency services arrived, Kevin was found completely unresponsive in the middle of the street. And at first, just by the way that it looked, police thought that this may have been a wrong place, wrong time, possible road rage incident. And that's because about 100 feet from Kevin's body, they found his Prius parked in the middle of the street with its hazard lights on. And they also noticed slight damage to the rear bumper. And it was hard to see but there was sort of like an imprint from what looked like another car's license plate holder. So their thinking at first is that he got into some type of fender bender and was shot by whoever the person was. And they were able to confirm part of this theory, somewhat true, after they canvassed the neighborhood. And it turns out that there were 2 witnesses that actually saw what happened, or at least like parts of it. And then the stories that they were telling matched what was seen on a neighbor's security camera. And unfortunately, the quality isn't great because the camera was inside the house and it pointed out the window. So there's a pretty big reflection. You can see things inside the home, but you can actually see what's going on the street as well, see both cars and exactly how it plays out, and you can hear everything. So it was still incredibly useful. But basically, the detectives could see that Kevin's car was, in fact, rear-ended by this dark-colored SUV. And then Kevin can be seen putting on his hazards and exiting his car to approach the driver of the other vehicle. And knowing how kind Kevin was, I'm sure he really did think that it was an accident. He was probably approaching their car to possibly even see if they were okay and to get insurance information or something like that. But in the footage, the SUV had backed out of the frame. I mean, it's covered by a wall, basically the wall of the house, but you can hear the sound of 2 gunshots and then screaming, and it's very disturbing, followed by 6 gunshots. And this actually was posted. I don't want to put it in this episode because, like I said, it's very disturbing and I wouldn't want someone in his family to see this. If you do want to see it for yourself, it is available online. There's a 48 Hours episode where they do play it. So if you want to see it there, you can. But what was different from their original theory is this was no road rage incident. This was personal. And they believe that after seeing how many times Kevin was shot and the fact that it was done at such close range. Apparently, 2 witnesses say they ran to their windows after they heard what was going on, and they saw the shooter standing over who they now know was Kevin. And that stance alone is super personal, standing over someone like that after you have executed them. But what was tricky, though, right off the bat is the detectives felt like this had to have been connected to the other 4 shootings, but they weren't quite sure how. All they knew is that they had found the same .45 caliber shell casings and that the shooter was in a dark-colored SUV. But no one had died in any of those previous shootings, and of course it's possible that the killer had intended for people to be shot, but just missed. But it was odd that just on this final shooting, suddenly there is a homicide here that they're dealing with, and it just didn't make a whole lot of sense. And they were hoping as they started to interview people that maybe things would start clicking into place. But to make matters even more difficult, when detectives went in and spoke with people who lived in the houses involved in those other shootings, none of them knew Kevin. So there was no obvious connection there, which made this all pretty confusing right off the bat. And Kevin's mom, oh my God, it's just horrendous to think about. She got the news really late at night, and she had to be the most confused of all. When officers went and knocked on her door to let them know what happened to her son, she was absolutely beside herself with grief. She fell to the ground crying and couldn't offer any explanation as to why anyone would want Kevin dead. Linda talked to them about her son, and I mean, you guys heard it. Kevin just was not someone who would have gotten caught up in anything shady. I mean, this made no sense to anybody. She also told them about his new fiancée, Zion, who they had already talked to as well that night. And she was actually able to provide a bit more context to that entire day. So Zion explained that earlier in the day, the 2 of them had gone ice fishing, and then they went back and made dinner at her apartment. Kevin also went grocery shopping with her, and the night ended on totally normal terms. And it does make me happy thinking that he got to spend his last day with her. And it sounds like it was a wonderful day. You know, he was outside in nature and cooking together. And I'm just glad that he got to be with the love of his life in the end like that. But this is so heartbreaking. Okay, so the shooting actually only happened like 2 blocks from her house. And she was so close to it that she actually heard the gunshots go off, but she didn't think it had anything to do with Kevin. She kind of Her sense of time sort of was off that night. She thought that he had left a lot earlier than he did. She thought maybe he had left like 5 to 10 minutes prior, which would have put him too far away to be involved. So to her, it just didn't even cross her mind that the shooting would have anything to do with him. And like Linda, she also couldn't think of anyone who would want to hurt him. So yeah, of course, that first night ended with a lot more questions than answers. And even though it hadn't been that long, word definitely started to spread quickly about what had happened. One friend had actually texted him after she heard what happened, just saying something along the lines of, please respond, please answer your text, because she just couldn't accept that this was real, that Kevin was gone. But this was very real. And the only thing people wanted to know now is who did it and why? Why would anyone want to do this to Kevin? Well, luckily, it was only 15 hours later that they ended up catching a major break, because it turns out that 30 minutes after Kevin was killed, a security guard in the neighboring town of North Haven called 911 from a local scrap metal yard about a suspicious dark-colored SUV that drove through the yard and got stuck on the snowy train tracks. And while this was weird, I guess, it also wasn't that uncommon. I guess people, especially teens, would sneak in there, or just random people of any age would get lost back there looking for the highway. I guess this was something that happened quite often. And that's exactly what this driver of the SUV said, that he was lost trying to find his way back to Massachusetts. And they believed him because, for one, he did not look nervous or suspicious. I mean, not at all. I've seen the footage of it. He seemed calm as a cucumber. And two, when they ran his driver's license, it came back totally clean. Now, the driver was 29-year-old Sheen Schwan Pan. And off the bat, I just want to mention that I've heard at least 3 different ways to pronounce his first name, so that's just my best interpretation. I could be wrong, and I certainly apologize if I am. But most people in the coverage that I've seen on this case just refer to him as Pan, his last name, so I'm just going to do that. But anyways, what's interesting here is that even though his driver's license did come up clean, the license plate to the car that he was driving didn't. It came up as lost or stolen. And despite saying that the car was a rental, he wasn't able to provide any kind of documentation or explain why it would appear lost or stolen. And I will say the reporting here is not very clear. It's a little confusing, but I don't believe that this was viewed with much concern, at least not in the moment. The officer basically was like, why don't we just get you a hotel for the night? We'll get the car towed, and then we can sort of sort this out in the morning. And at first, Pan did say that he preferred to get it off the tracks himself, but he ultimately agreed that a tow truck could come and get it, and he rode with the tow truck driver to the hotel. And what's interesting is the driver later told police that when he dropped him off at the Best Western, Pan was adamant that he needed to get some items out of the rental. He even jumped onto the flatbed, to which the driver had to yell at him multiple times to get down, even grabbing him by the shirt so he would get off. Eventually, the driver agreed to retrieve the items himself for Pan, and that included a computer bag, a backpack, a jacket, and a blue bag. And if you're wondering why police didn't question him more, I guess apparently the officers in North Haven hadn't heard of the news that had just taken place in New Haven, at least according to some sources. And by news, I mean the shooting. But I'm not completely sure about that, because there are sources that say that they knew that a shooting had taken place, but they were just misinformed on the suspect. These sources say that the officers in New Haven were told to be on the lookout for 2 suspects, one of whom was a black male, which doesn't fit the description of Pan. But in my opinion, this seems like a bit of a failure. I understand where they were coming from. I've seen interviews with them that he just seemed like nothing was going on. I mean, he seemed very, very chill, and they did look in his car and they saw some bags and things that they didn't look into, which we'll get back to that in a minute. But it's frustrating thinking that they may not have known that this was a homicide, and they should have, since it was in literally the neighboring town. But if they did know, I think they definitely should have taken some more time to question Pan even more. Especially because, let me remind you, the plates on his car came up as lost or stolen. But he was free to go, and so to their knowledge, he checked in at the Best Western Hotel. And they learned later that next morning that he never actually stayed there, though. Get this, okay? So around 11 a.m. on the 7th, that same North Haven police officer was called to an Arby's because an employee found a blue bag containing a gun and several boxes of ammunition. The bag was out by the dumpster where they also found 7 firearm magazines, a briefcase, a pair of black Skechers, a gray knit winter hat with a Metro PCS logo on it, a GMC Terrain owner's manual, a pair of lug nuts, a yellow jacket, gray sweatpants, a blue plastic bag labeled City of Malden, Massachusetts, 3 license plates, and scissors. And many of those items, as I mentioned earlier, were seen by the officers the night before in his car. And there's actually footage of it, specifically the blue bag with that Malden, Massachusetts logo on it, also the hat with the Metro PCS logo on it, that yellow jacket, and the briefcase. Not to mention, they also remembered that on Pon's ID that he was from Malden. So now the light bulbs were starting to go off, and the officer who got everything from the Arby's was realizing right away, I have seen these things in that car that I pulled over the other night. And by this point, they are all aware that a murder had taken place last night, right before they talked to Pon. And their first thought was, oh shit, maybe he is our guy, and we let him get away. And they were even more confident about that because the ammunition in those bags was .45 caliber, the same kind used to kill Kevin, the same kind that was shot into all those different homes. And so a group of officers went over to the Best Western, which just happened to be across the street from the Arby's, and they wanted to see if he was still there. And as you probably could have guessed, he was long gone. He's nowhere to be found. So they ended up sending a few officers up to Malden, where they believed that he was living with his parents, but once again, he's nowhere to be found. And at first, investigators were actually worried that maybe he had done something to his parents as well. But as you'll hear me say, this is the opposite of what happened, actually. So their next step here is figuring out who this guy is and how he might be connected. And here's where things start to get crazy. When they went through his Facebook, they learned that he was a graduate student at MIT. And that he was mutual friends with Zion. And when investigators spoke with her, she confirmed that she did know him from MIT. They had met in 2019, but they were not close by any stretch. They were more like acquaintances than anything. There was never like a real friendship, but she did say that she had gotten the sense that he may have been interested in her, but it was never the other way around. And I guess he had reached out to her in May of 2020 after she graduated to, congratulate her. And he had asked her to FaceTime. And understandably, she politely declined. I mean, it's not like she knew him very well. And I certainly wouldn't want to get on a random FaceTime call with someone I was only acquainted with. But of course, as investigators are asking her questions about Pon, she's really confused. And eventually they tell her that he is a person of interest in Kevin's murder. She was shocked. I mean, totally confused. This was someone that she had only met on a few school-related occasions, and it had been 9 months since their last contact. He didn't even know Kevin personally, so she could not comprehend why he would want Kevin dead. And at that point, investigators are really starting to build a theory. It started to look like maybe Pon was secretly obsessed with Zion and that he needed to get Kevin out of the way, that it was all because of jealousy. And realistically, that's kind of the only thing that makes sense at this point, right? Here's what's interesting, though. So we know that just a week before Kevin was killed, as a reminder, he and Zion posted on Facebook about getting engaged, which you probably assume could be a trigger for someone like Pon, who could have been secretly obsessed with Zion. And maybe to a degree it was. But think about it. Those random shootings started happening back in December, several weeks before Kevin even proposed. And so at that point, investigators are thinking, maybe he had planned this for quite some time before he even knew that the two of them were engaged. So their theory was shaping into this at this point in time, that maybe Pon was shooting into those houses because he wanted it to look like Kevin's murder was just part of a string of random shootings. But of course, knowing his connection to Zion, it was hard to believe that there was anything random about the fact that he had chosen to kill Kevin. But the only tricky thing is that the gun they found at Arby's was actually not a match to the murder weapon. And the actual murder weapon has never been recovered to this day, but it didn't necessarily change anything about their theory. It's just something you should know. And another thing that you should know, it has to do with that dark-colored SUV. Turns out, big shocker here, it was, in fact, stolen. Investigators learned that Pon actually had quite a habit of going into car dealerships in Massachusetts and specifically asking to test drive GMC Terrains. He would tell the dealerships that he wanted to get the cars inspected, so he'd be gone for a while, and it turns out that the dates he did that lined up perfectly with all of these shootings. And on the night Kevin died, he had swapped out the license plate, hence why it came up as lost or stolen. And the car itself was reported stolen by the dealership. So all things considered, he is very much a person of interest in this case, but finding him turned out to be quite difficult. But before I get into all of that and the manhunt, I wanted to share a little bit more about Kevin's funeral, which was, as you can imagine, incredibly emotional, but also very beautiful. Now, first, there was a candlelight vigil where over 700 people joined to listen to the impact that he made in his almost 27 years of life. Zion talked about seeing him again in heaven, and his mom talked about the joy that he brought to their lives. And when his dad spoke, oh my God, it just ripped my heart out. He could barely say much at all through his tears, but he reminded everyone of how nice his son was and how much people loved him. And then later in the week, an in-person funeral was held, and Kevin was laid to rest at the State Veterans Cemetery, where he was buried with military honors. I actually found a clip from the service, and I wanted to play some of what his parents said because it's just too beautiful not to share.
Kevin was my beloved only child. Last Saturday evening, when the police told me he was shot, my first reaction was, this cannot be real. Kevin lived full-heartedly, enthusiastically, like a ray of sunlight. He gave so much joy and happiness to me and to the people around us. Our home was often filled with the sound of his playing piano. I could not believe that a life full of so much energy and light could vanish from before my eyes. Kevin loved life and had a wide range of interests. He loved animals, music, and dance, as well as gymnastics, swimming, hiking, and photography. Kevin's life was short but colorful and brought so much joy, happiness, and positivity to the people around him. Kevin was very caring, thoughtful, and attentive to me. He invited me to live with him in Connecticut and always reassured me by saying, "Mom, I will take care of you. Don't worry." As a mother, I will always miss Kevin and treasure the blessings he brought me. Although Kevin is gone from us now, Kevin is the most wonderful gift God has ever given me on earth. I look forward to be reunited with Kevin in heaven in the future.
To my beloved son, as a devoted Christian, you are a faithful servant of Jesus. As a matured son, you took kind care of your family. Your heart is full of love. Your smile is always warming and charming. You are naturally unguarded and honest. My dear, you said that heaven is peaceful. You wish it. That would be our future home. Where are you in heaven now? We will look for you with the rest of our life, and will stay with you. Thank you.
I also wanted to play this clip of Zion speaking, so take a listen.
I want to start with a poem Kevin wrote me because I think it helps show the kind of man Kevin truly was. To my beloved Zion, Zion, oh my love, you are my angel from above. If this world falls apart, it will be all right because we have each other's hearts. You lead me closer to God and make me strong and forgive me of all my wrongs. You're the answer to my prayers and pleas. With you, I feel loved, respected, and at ease. I support you through and through in no matter what you do. May God continue to bless our friendship day by day, and I'll always be there for you every step of the way. Like many others have told me, I do believe that Kevin is in his Heavenly Father's arms, gazing now at the sea of glass. Kevin's face always looked so calm and peaceful when he closed his eyes to pray or take a nap. So that was a small glimpse of how peaceful and calm his face must be now. I believe Kevin is worshiping with the angels and all the saints that have gone before him. Kevin worshiped in spirit and truth on the piano, so that was a small glimpse of how beautiful his music must sound now. I can't wait to see my beloved sweetheart in his glorified body. 2020 was my year of blessings because I met my dear Kevin. I will always love him with the love of Christ. Wo aini jiang kai wen.
And then something I also thought was very beautiful was the fact that in the wake of his death, New Haven police officers went door to door to check on the residents and see how they were doing in the wake of this tragedy, which we almost never see anything like this. And I think it's really, really important and special and something that more police departments should be doing. So hats off to them for sure. Because even if these people didn't know Kevin directly, his death was still painful for everyone and shocking, especially paired with all these other shootings. And everyone, and I really mean everyone, wanted to see that justice was served, which did come, but not easily. So getting back to the search, okay, on February 10th, Pon was announced as a person of interest in Kevin's murder, and there was actually a warrant out for his arrest at this point. But it wasn't for murder, it was actually for possessing a stolen vehicle. Although, if I'm being honest, I'm sure most of you agree, I think they were very confident that he was their guy for Kevin's murder as well, and just were looking to bring him in on anything they could. And I think they knew it wasn't going to be easy. One thing you got to know about Pon is he is genius level smart. He was studying AI at MIT and he knew his way around technology. Luckily, though, the U.S. Marshals got involved really quickly and they were utilizing all their resources to try and track his ass down. And here's what they learned. So for starters, they figured out that he had been using at least 3 cell phones, which he had been using when it came to test driving those cars. And one of those phones he actually used to contact his parents not too long after he had killed Kevin. And while we don't know exactly what he told them, we know that shortly after that call, they made a $1,000 cash withdrawal. And this was especially concerning because after investigators dug more into his family, they could see that he came from a good deal of wealth. Not to mention they had assets in Shanghai, so if he wanted to get out of the country, he possibly could. Thankfully, though, that didn't happen. And I will say, and I guess this is in my opinion, but it's the opinion of many, I think his parents did appear to know more than they were letting on. So basically, by this point, which is only a few days after the murder, there was a nationwide manhunt going on for Pon. At one point, they thought he was in North Carolina because one of his phones pinged there, but when they got there, they found it smashed on the ground. Then they thought he was near Atlanta, Georgia, because on February 11th, his parents were pulled over in that area by police. But unfortunately, they were there alone. And what's interesting is how the two of them appeared to react to all of this. When they were told that their son was a person of interest in a murder case, neither of them looked shocked at all. You would think that if police sat you down and told you that we suspect your son may have killed somebody in cold blood, that you would have at least a little bit of shock, but not at all from these people. And in fact, his dad had quite an interesting story. He said that he did talk to his son recently and that he had called him from Connecticut looking for help, and he didn't specify why, according to him, so keep that in mind. But he asked them to bring him cash, and they did. They also let him drive their car with them in it south towards Georgia. And at some point, I guess he just pulled over, got out of the car, and walked away. And apparently they didn't ask him any questions. They just let him go. And I just don't buy that at all. And of course, police also thought that this was strange. I don't think they were buying it at all either. So they wanted to know more. And they asked his parents to come back in and have a little bit more of a chat-see. And they did agree to come into the station, but his mom declined to talk without an attorney. And all that she was willing to say was that her son probably just took his own life, which is something that you would think a parent would be far more concerned about if it were true. But the thing is, investigators just had a feeling that they were the type of parents who would be willing to do anything to protect their son, even if it meant going to jail for him. They wanted the police to just accept the story of, yeah, he probably killed himself. He's gone. You know, don't worry about it. It's like essentially what they were trying to say. And I do have to say that a lot of that is my opinion and what I'm interpreting things as, but I know investigators were feeling the same. So I think right off the bat, they knew that it was not going to be easy to work with them, that it was not going to be easy to get information out of them, and that they, you know, at the end of the day, just wanted to protect their son, even if it was wrong. And there's no proof that they knew. I mean, I'll explain exactly how things shook out with them. So a lot of this, again, is just in my opinion. So for the next few weeks, they kept tabs on them, thinking that they would lead them to their son. And there were several things over the following weeks that caught the investigators' attention, including the thousands of dollars that they were withdrawing from their bank account. Okay, so big red flag there, right? It was something like $10,000, which, considering they had the resources to get their son out of the country, this was highly concerning. They also rented a car at one point and started driving back down south. But here's what's also wild. Even though the literal U.S. Marshals were tracking them, the GPS on the rental car went dark. And this was actually a sign to them that Pon was in contact with his parents because they knew that he was capable of disabling GPS. Then there was another time where they caught his dad at a mall in Georgia buying a computer. He appeared on the store's security footage wearing a mask as he made the purchase. And they actually think Pon may have been with him because someone matching his description entered the store shortly after he did, which again sort of confirmed their belief that maybe he was alive and he didn't take his life like his parents had suggested. But of course, that's what they wanted investigators to think. But then 2 more months went by with nothing. And at that point, people in the community, people in Kevin's life, were rightfully worried that Kevin was never going to get justice. Even with a $10,000 reward, nothing seemed to come of it. And by this point in time, it's important to note that the warrant for his arrest was in fact for murder. After they swabbed that car that he stole, they discovered traces of Kevin's blood on the gear shifter. They also confirmed that the license plate holder was a match to the mark left on Kevin's Prius from the fender bender. So at this point, it's pretty hard to deny that he was clearly involved. They just needed to find him. And thankfully, by May, they did exactly that. On May 4th, his parents took their 3rd road trip down south, but this time they weren't alone. They were with another couple, actually, which investigators believe was strategic. They think that it was his parents trying to make it look like they were just on this normal couples trip and that they really weren't going down there to see their son, which obviously they were. So they were placed under surveillance at a hotel in North Carolina. And at one point during the night, his mom came down to the lobby and asked to use the hotel clerk's phone. They ended up capturing this picture of her talking on the phone, which ended up being super important to the case. Basically, investigators suspected what I'm sure you're suspecting too, that she was talking to her son. And she was. She did try and was successful in deleting the number off of the clerk's phone, but investigators were obviously able to still figure out who she had called. And on May 14th, they tracked that phone to a boarding house near Alabama State University, which is where they finally successfully recovered Pon. Apparently, when they knocked on the door, he just came out right away and told him that he was the guy they were looking for. I think at that point, he just knew that there was no way out of this, and I'm sure, I don't know. I wonder where his mindset was at by this point, if he just, you know, the guilt of it all was catching up to him. Did he really feel bad, or was it just too exhausting and draining to be on the run. And he just eventually realized, okay, I'm not going to be able to keep up with this. And my genius plan didn't really play out the way, I mean, he thought he was going to be able to trick them by doing all these other shootings. And clearly he is not as smart as he thought he was. And I think he had figured it out at this point. And I do wonder if maybe the guilt was starting to really get to him. But in his room, they ended up finding $19,000 in cash, 7 phones, 7 SIM cards, a computer, and also his dad's passport, all of which would suggest that he may have been trying to leave the country. Thankfully, though, he didn't get the chance. And I do wonder if that really was the case and they didn't make it to him and find him at that moment, would he have actually left? Was he ready for the jig to be up? I don't know. He is such a big question mark for me. He's hard to read in a lot of ways. But anyway, after he was arrested, Pon was brought back to Connecticut where he was held on a $20 million bond on charges of murder and second-degree larceny. And as they always do, of course, he and his attorney tried to have that bond reduced, and it was unsuccessful. And I thought this was a pretty interesting fact. So this process all went down pretty slowly because of the pandemic. And at some point, he ended up getting a new attorney, actually. And this just so happened to be the same guy who represented Fotis Doulos in the Jennifer Doulos murder case. Now, I've covered that case extensively. It is still one that crosses my mind very often. I think I've done a couple of episodes on it. And if you're not familiar with it and you're interested, I'll have it linked below. But yeah, I thought that was a crazy connection. But anyways, Pon was fully planning on pleading not guilty, and he stuck with that for quite a while. But ultimately, in February of 2024, he did change his plea to guilty, which, considering the evidence against him, it's pretty stupid that he even tried to plead not guilty to begin with, but people do all the time. Now, I've already told you that Kevin's blood was on the gear shifter of the car that he was driving, but they also found Pon's DNA on the gun and the ammo outside of that Arby's. Although, just a reminder here, remember that gun was not the actual murder weapon, but either way, though, he is linked to a lot of evidence that really just could not be disputed. So he pleaded guilty, and that meant he was able to take a deal where he would only have to serve 35 years in prison. His sentencing took place in April of 2024, and that day several people read victim impact statements, including his parents. Kevin's dad said in part, "He was a true victim here. My son was a remarkable young man who cherished life and held deep belief in God. He had a bright future ahead, one that promised to spread God's love far and wide." Now, his mom had a friend read her impact statement for her, but she ended up deciding to say a few words herself, actually. And she touched on the very sad truth that 35 years is not a long enough sentence. And I think most of you will agree with that. I mean, I certainly do. And obviously, that's the downside of taking a guilty plea. He'll be 65 years old when he's released. And while that's older, it's not necessarily old, you know? I mean, there's still a lot of life left to live potentially. And when you think about how much life he took away from Kevin, it doesn't seem fair at all. In fact, it's infuriating to think about. And as much as we can hope that he's reformed in prison, I can absolutely understand and see why Kevin's loved ones are concerned for the day that he's let out. And Zion spoke too, and she addressed him directly, which was very brave, I think. And this is so eerie. Pon, he's such a creep to me, but the whole time, he was too much of a bitch to make eye contact with anyone. But as soon as Zion started speaking, he instantly looked up at her. It really took until that moment, which I think says so much about why he did this. I mean, they were never able to confirm his motive, why he did it, and if it was because of Zion. Seems incredibly obvious, though. I mean, that connection is the only thing that makes sense, right? But the fact that he popped his little stupid head up as soon as she started talking says it all. But she talked about what an honor it was to know Kevin, a man that she said was filled with valor and honor and who would have made a wonderful husband and father. And the idea that she has to miss out on all that for nothing because some lunatic that she used to know was clearly so obsessed with her that he couldn't even imagine another man being with her, when they never, have to just remind you once again, they never had a relationship, a friendship. They were acquaintances. and she hadn't seen him or spoken to him in a very long time. And then Pon himself spoke, which was interesting. We don't always get to see that. But again, he never truly explained why he killed Kevin. But he did say that he was sorry for what his actions caused and accepts the consequences of those actions. Now, does he actually mean that? I don't know. You'll have to be the judge of that. If I'm telling you my opinion, I really don't think he does. I did not get a good sense of remorse there. I think he just said what he thought would be helpful to hear. I don't know. I just truly don't think he has any remorse. I think something is deeply, deeply wrong with Pon. And like I said, I do fully agree with Kevin's mom that 35 years just isn't enough. It's very, very frustrating. And Kevin has lost far more than 35 years. And the fact that he won't ever get to walk free the way that his killer will is infuriating. Now, Kevin's friends say that he was the kind of person who would have forgiven Pon for what he did. And I think that's a huge testament to his character. And just by, what I know about him, what I've learned about him and watching a bunch of his videos online, he seems like the type that would be able to find it in his heart to forgive his own killer because he was that amazing of a person, that deep and thoughtful and kind. And God, just what a massive, unnecessary loss. It's heartbreaking. And at the end of the day, it just feels so confusing because I'd be really curious to know more about this obsession that Pon clearly had with Zion because it doesn't sound like there hasn't been a lot of information released on that. I don't think there is a lot to be known. I don't know how much they were able to get out of him. I don't know if he was ever honest about it. But when you think about it, he had to have been pretty obsessed to have done what he did. And what's also so crazy to me is if you think about it, if Pon hadn't gotten stuck on those train tracks in the junkyard, I don't know if he would have been caught. He could still have been caught, but it's possible he wouldn't have. If he didn't go and stay at Best Western that night and leave the gun and ammunition at the Arby's, who knows if they would have ever caught him. Or even if they did eventually catch him, I'm not sure if it would have been that quick. Now, I'm sure a lot of you are wondering about his parents. Well, they never got charged. At the end of the day, investigators just couldn't prove that they knew what he did. And so there haven't been any kind of repercussions for them, which is really frustrating because I truly believe, I think most of you will agree, that they did know what he had done, or at least knew that he did something really bad. I think it says a whole lot that they were like, oh yeah, no, he killed himself. You can just move on. Like, that's the vibe they were trying to get. Like, nothing to see here. I don't know. It's just so frustrating. All this was so, so unnecessary. And the fact, like, when you really think about it, the idea that Kevin didn't know Pon, had no idea who this man was, and like thinking about what his last moments were like is devastating. He was probably so confused. And it happened fast. He was shot, 8 times very quickly. So at least it was quick. But I can imagine that in those moments, he had to have been so confused. He had no idea who Pon was. But at the end of the day, though, I'm just glad that there has been some kind of justice, even though it's not, I think, what anyone wanted, other than maybe Pon's parents. But I think everyone in Kevin's life, and I'm sure most of you wish he had gotten more, and I certainly feel that way. And it goes without saying, I guess, that justice will never bring Kevin home, but at least it's something. And I'm grateful that they were able to catch him and that there is some accountability. And 35 years is a lot. Not enough, once again, but yeah. But that's going to be it for me today, guys. I definitely want to hear your thoughts on this case, so let me know. And if anyone in Kevin's family or his friends see this episode, I just want to say I am so terribly sorry for your loss. Kevin, it's going to make me emotional. He just seemed so special, so wonderful. I hope that you guys will go and check out his YouTube channel and maybe follow some of his fitness or nutrition tips or listen to some of his music. He just had so much to offer the world. And to Zion, I'm so sorry that You guys were just about to begin this next chapter. I mean, had just gotten engaged a week before. Just so horrible, so unnecessary. But that is going to be it for me today, guys. I will be back next week to discuss another case. But until then, stay safe out there. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of True Crime with Kendall Ray. Thank you so much, as always, for joining me. And if you are new to the show, then welcome. Thank you for stopping by, and I hope you'll consider clicking subscribe so that you never miss an upload from me. Okay, guys, so today we are getting into one that is beyond words, upsetting, devastating, completely unnecessary, ridiculous, enraging. I feel that you are all going to be, when you hear the details, as pissed off as I have been while researching this case. Today we're going to be talking about the murder of two people, actually, because we're talking about Melissa Lamish. And when she was murdered, she was very close to giving birth. She was 9 months pregnant with her son, Barrett, who never even got a chance to make it into this world. Barrett was going to be Melissa's first son, and she was very excited about becoming a mother, and I truly believe she would have been a fantastic mother. Melissa was very down to earth, very capable, strong woman, also beautiful, and it's just enraging to think about how completely unnecessary this was. And it's also just wildly disturbing because of the circumstances of the murder. I mean, it honestly was just, there's no other way to describe it other than like demonic. Melissa and Barrett should be here today. Melissa should be raising her son, and they're not because of the actions of a truly sick, disgusting, vile, waste of life human. And I don't even want to utter his name yet. We will wait until we have to. And I have no doubt that you guys are going to have the same opinion as me on this one. Let's just get into it, starting with me telling you more about Melissa. So Melissa was born on Mother's Day, May 10th of 1993. And God, I actually just realized her and I were less than a month apart in age. She was one of 5 siblings to be raised by their parents, Dina and Gus, in Mount Morris, Illinois. Her siblings, Carl, Cassie, Brian, and Julia Lynn, were all very close, and they have nothing but positive things to say about their sister. Melissa was caring, very unselfish, strong, fierce, and she was someone who would truly do anything for anyone. And I love this way that they described her. They said that she was the perfect mix of sugar and spice. And those are the people in life I tend to be drawn to. Her mom says that the two of them were a lot alike, maybe even more so than either of them would like to admit, specifically when it came to her independence and her stubbornness. Melissa was also very outspoken. She was incredibly bright, funny, and was quite the perfectionist, actually. Her brother Carl says that everything she did to a T. So it would make sense that whenever she applied herself to something, she did it well, which was exactly the case when she decided that she wanted to become an EMT, which is a perfect career for her because it does require a lot of strength and passion and commitment and, just going at it full force every day. And also it requires the compassion and empathy to help people, which Melissa truly wanted to do. Now, how she ended up getting into this career field is kind of interesting. She had an incident in college that ended up with her in the ER, and she had a really good experience with the EMTs who helped her, and that's sort of what inspired her and sparked her interest into going into that career path. She had also been hosting trivia nights at a local bar where a lot of first responders went, and that also encouraged her to go back to school to become an EMT herself. And her family says that entering the paramedic program for her was really a defining moment in her life, and to say that they were proud of her would truly be an understatement. Melissa got a job working for Trace Ambulance in Tinley Park, and after graduating from her program in January of 2020, her mom says that she was part of the ambulance crew that transported the first COVID patient in Chicago. And I imagine that it must have been a truly crazy and chaotic time to get into that field right at the beginning of the pandemic in general. And it was also around this time that she found out that she was pregnant, and Melissa was very, very excited about this pregnancy, even though it was unplanned. She was 27 years old, and she had the full support of her family behind her, which was also a huge blessing because the baby's father, Matthew Plody, felt the complete opposite and was very vocal in asking her to terminate the pregnancy. But of course, that is not Matthew's choice, and she wouldn't do it. She was so excited about becoming a mom, and she didn't want to let his absence stop her from going through with it and being the mom that she wanted to be. And in fact, everyone in her family agreed that Melissa was better off without him. She truly didn't need him. She was very, like I've been saying, capable, strong, smart. Like, she had all of the qualities, not to mention empathetic, loving, caring, and just overall, I think would have been an excellent mother if she had gotten the chance to be one. But what's interesting, though, is her family didn't actually know who he was. Melissa just wasn't very open with her family about who the baby's father was, and it actually sort of drove them nuts for a while. But eventually, though, they were able to figure it out on their own. Her sister Cassie was able to figure it out just by picking up on hints and going through Melissa's social media, and then others only found out who he was after what happened. But for the sake of this episode, I'm not going to be hiding the fact that the father is Matt Plody, and I mean, everyone knows it now. And he was actually someone that Melissa knew for a while before becoming pregnant. They met back in 2013 at one of those trivia nights that Melissa hosted. And as I mentioned before, they were hosted at a bar where first responders tended to go. Well, Matt worked for the Carroll Stream Fire District as a paramedic and volunteer firefighter, and he was one of those people who frequented the bar. So they met there and became friends, and they never dated in any official capacity. And from what I was able to gauge, they were just friends with benefits, basically. They would just hook up from time to time. So when Melissa ended up getting pregnant, it was a surprise to both of them. But on her end, it was a surprise that she was welcoming with open arms. Her mom, Deanna, says that Melissa was born to become a mother herself. And just by the way that she was preparing to bring her baby boy into this world, it's very obvious that she really would have been a great one. And to be a great mom, she knew that she would need the support of her family. So in October of 2020, she decided to move back into her childhood home with her dad. Melissa's parents had been divorced for a while, but they were both equally as excited about helping her in whatever way that she needed. And I'm truly thankful that Melissa had such a supportive family, and from all the interviews I've seen of them, they all seem like wonderful people who were truly just there to have Melissa's back at every turn of her life. Now, she had also had a few health-related issues towards the end of her pregnancy, things like high blood pressure and fainting spells, so living with her dad was also just to make sure that both she and the baby were safe in those last few weeks. But no one could have ever imagined that Melissa and baby Barrett were far from safe, because just 2 days before she was supposed to be induced and 1 day before Thanksgiving, the two of them were brutally killed. It was November 25th of 2020, and because of COVID and because she was about to give birth, her doctors recommended that she not spend Thanksgiving with a bunch of people. So from what I understand, that Wednesday before Thanksgiving, the plan was that she was going to prep herself to head to the hospital the day after Thanksgiving and, pack up all of that. And then the following night, that Thursday, she would just have Thanksgiving dinner at home with just her dad. But she never even made it that far. So let me explain. At 4:28 p.m. on the 25th, a 911 call was placed by her father Gus's neighbor after they saw smoke pouring out of his house. And this, you guys, was no small house fire. When firefighters arrived and broke through the locked front door, they had to crawl on their hands and knees to make their way through the house. There was only about 5 inches of visibility in front of them, and they went in there under the belief that someone was inside. Not just because there was a car parked in the driveway, but because the fire chief, who happened to know Gus personally, called him to ask him if anyone was there. And Gus said that the chief sounded incredibly panicked when he asked if anyone was inside the house. And when he explained that Melissa was there, that's when he learned that the house was on fire. And can you imagine the panic that he experienced in those moments trying to get back to the house after hearing that news, knowing that your daughter, who is about to give birth, is in that home? So he rushes home as soon as he could, but by the time he got there, it was too late. When firefighters crawled their way through the house, they found Melissa's body lying face down on the kitchen floor. And because of the smoke, they had to drag her out, hoping that they would be able to save her and the baby, but Devastatingly, both of them were already gone. And during all of this, her mother, Deanna, got a similar, very frightening call. It was from her son, Carl, asking if she had heard from Melissa that day, which she hadn't. And for a brief second, she didn't think anything of it. But then Carl explained that he wasn't just asking casually. He was asking because their dad's house where Melissa was staying was on fire and no one could get a hold of her. And in that moment, everything just came crashing down. Deanna was with Melissa's younger sister, Julia Lynn, whose 17th birthday just so happened to be that day. And it was obviously not a day that they got to end up celebrating. They were actually at the store getting cake when they got the call, but the moment they heard about the fire, they dropped everything to rush to Mount Morris. When they were about halfway there, though, a call from her other son, Brian, came in, and before even answering, she knew what it meant. Both she and Julia Lynn had a gut-sinking feeling that Melissa was gone, and they were right. And this was the same feeling that her older sister Cassie got as well. She and her husband were also at the store when Carl called, and Cassie just said that her whole world collapsed in that parking lot. Like the rest of her family, she rushed to the house as fast as she could, but like I said, Melissa and her baby were already gone. And as you probably could have guessed, the first order of business here was determining what started this fire, and more importantly, determining if the fire was Melissa's cause of death, because at first, before any investigators were able to step inside the house, it was assumed that Melissa likely died as a result of smoke inhalation. You know, maybe it was a situation where she was cooking and had one of her fainting spells that she was experiencing in pregnancy and wasn't able to escape all that smoke, which at the time sounded reasonable enough, but the thing is, though, as soon as investigators and the fire chief were able to go inside, they realized that that could not have been the case. It was obvious right away that the fire started in the kitchen based on how most of the damage was concentrated in that area. And you would think that this would confirm their theory that Melissa was cooking, a fire started, and she just somehow couldn't get out. But the closer they looked, the less this looked accidental. When looking at the stove, all of the burners were switched off and the oven was completely empty, suggesting that she wasn't cooking anything when the fire started. And then after that, experts looked at the circuit breaker. They wanted to see if there was some kind of electrical problem there, but it appeared perfectly fine. So it wasn't electrical, and it wasn't because of something that Melissa was cooking. So what happened here? Because they could tell that the fire originated from the cabinet area just above the stove. And so after ruling out any accidental causes, that left only one other option, that this fire was set intentionally. And what was also immediately strange was that this fire was described as a survivable fire, despite how bad it was, meaning that if someone were inside the house, they should have been able to escape. And you got to think about the fact that Melissa was an EMT, and there were several routes that she could have escaped from. So they had no doubt that she would have walked out of that house if she could. Of course she would have. So all of that is suggesting that she was likely incapacitated before the fire was set. And obviously, they didn't know this for certain at this point, but that was definitely how it was looking. Plus, when lead investigator Brian Ketter went inside the ambulance to look at Melissa, he realized that her injuries were not consistent with dying in a fire. So from that point forward, they had to consider that this could have been a homicide. So their next step here is to question her loved ones, to learn more about her life, and see if there was anyone that they knew of who would have wanted her dead. And naturally, of course, the baby's father came up. Now, through their conversations with the family, it became clear that Matt was not supportive of her keeping the baby and that he had made zero effort at all to be involved. In fact, after he was pressuring her to terminate the pregnancy and she wouldn't, he just completely ghosted her, according to her family. Now, she would still include him in, updates and what was going on with the pregnancy and the baby every once in a while, because she did want her son at the end of the day to have the option of having his dad in his life if he wanted to and if Matt wanted to, but didn't seem like Matt wanted that at all because he would rarely respond to any of that. And to be perfectly clear here, it was not like Melissa even wanted him to be her boyfriend or anything like that. She, I think, knew the reality of who Matt was and that he likely wouldn't be involved much at all, but she wanted the door to be open for her son in the event that maybe he would change his mind and have interest in being involved in his own child's life. But he didn't. Not at all. And of course, that felt like a huge red flag to investigators. But the biggest red flag, though, at least in terms of what they learned in those first few hours, was what Melissa's sister Cassie had to say. So it turns out that earlier that day, the two of them were on the phone, and they were actually 2.5 hours into their phone call. And then out of nowhere, Melissa abruptly ended their conversation and said something like, "You've got to be kidding me. Matt is here. I'll make this quick and I'll let you know what he wants." Now, that's not a direct quote, but essentially Cassie's understanding was that Matt just showed up unannounced and that Melissa was going to see what he wanted and then give her a call right back. But that call, of course, never came. And that means that Matt was likely the last known person to see Melissa alive. And so, of course, they brought him in for questioning that same night. And in full transparency, they couldn't yet call him a person of interest at this point. And the point of bringing him in was really just to gauge his story, hear what he had to say, see if they could learn anything new. And right off the bat, Matt's energy was strange, to say the least. And to explain what I mean by that, just an example, when investigators told him that Melissa was dead, meaning his baby was also dead, he just sat there for a few seconds and then, he was just sitting there in silence and then suddenly goes, "Okay." Like, that's all he had to say, which is just shocking to see someone act this way. Whether you wanted this baby or not, whether you wanted to be in Melissa's life or not, you would think that someone that you had just stopped by to see the day that they died and who was in your life in some capacity, you would have a bit more emotion.
Melissa's deceased.
Now, Melissa's brother Carl did call Matt that evening to let him know that there had been a fire and that someone had died, but Carl didn't say who it was. So I guess you could maybe say that it wasn't a big shock to him because he had already figured that Melissa had died in the fire. But even still, there's really no excuse for it. He was way too casual about the whole thing, and alarm bells were going off for investigators right off the bat with him. There were no tears. There was no, "Sorry, I need a moment." He didn't even ask a single question, didn't even show any emotion or shock, just nothing. He just proceeded with the interview as if everything was normal. Like they just told him that Subway was closing down. I don't know. Like, the lack of reaction here is shocking. And not only is it just shocking in the way of, like, why would any human act this way, but also just how stupid do you have to be if you are trying to come across as innocent to have, like, most people, even when they have committed a murder, will try to drum up some emotion, put on a little act, a little show to try and make themselves seem less guilty. But Matt didn't even do that. And he was cooperative in answering questions, but his demeanor and his words were just cold. The dude literally used the term deadline to describe the pregnancy, which to me says so much. A deadline for pregnancy? Who says that? Most people, I think, are familiar enough with how pregnancy works to understand the term due date. Like, I have never heard someone say deadline. And I think that really tells you everything you need to know.
When did she notify you that she was pregnant?
Actually, May or April.
Have you been in any doctor's appointments or anything else with her?
No, I have not.
Okay. What was the situation? You're notified in April or May that she's pregnant.
We didn't have a good relationship for a while. There was a lack of communication. So I with my parents in the last 2 months. Just trying to. There's a deadline for that, so we were trying to do
a deadline for what?
I'm pregnancy. There's a deadline.
Were you guys considering an abortion?
I asked her about it, and she said no.
Okay.
If you ask me, the type of person who would talk about a due date as a deadline is the type of person who isn't expecting a baby to be there at the end, almost like it's a deadline for himself to take care of it. And the more investigators dug into Matt, both during the interview and after, they also realized that the deadline he was talking about wasn't Melissa giving birth. It was his own personal deadline for making sure that she didn't. But during that interview, he said what he could to make it seem like he went over there for innocent reasons. He actually tried to say that the reason he went over there in the first place was because he had come around to the idea of being involved. Like, really, dude? Like the day before she's supposed to be induced, or 2 days before, that's when you decide to be involved? How believable is that just in the first place? But he claimed that he dropped by to talk about finances and things like that. And he also said that after talking in the kitchen for about an hour, they proceeded to have sex. And just take a listen.
So what did you guys talk about today?
Finance. We talked about it before, and previously I wasn't really on board. But today, last couple weeks or so, I wanted to be involved, and so today I been wanting to revisit that and be more involved. My parents want to be involved.
Where was the conversation at in the house?
We sat at the kitchen table, and then her cat was all around.
Was there anybody else at the house when you were there?
No, it wasn't.
Anybody in between come and go?
Right.
Why? I mean, did anybody knock on the door, stop over?
No.
So you had a conversation at the kitchen table for about an hour. Then what?
We had sex.
Okay. Would you have sexual intercourse?
Couch.
Now, the idea that the two of them had sex just really didn't add up to investigators, especially when they thought about what her family had said. They had told investigators that her pregnancy, especially in those last couple weeks, was really, really tough. She was hardly eating anything and spent most of her time asleep. So the idea that she and Matt had sex just did not seem very likely at all. However, despite all of their suspicions at this point, they really had no reason to hold him. So Matt was allowed to leave. And what they needed in order to move forward here was the results of her autopsy. Investigators needed to see, 1, if she had soot in her airways, and 2, what levels of carbon monoxide were in her blood, because both of these would tell them whether or not she was alive when the fire was set. If she was alive, of course, that might rule out homicide, but if she wasn't, that would pretty much confirm that someone had killed her. Now, that autopsy, or at least the first one, which I will explain, took place on November 27th. And the problem was it was going to take 10 to 14 business days to get the results back. And they really didn't have time to wait around because every minute in a murder investigation counts. So they decided that they were going to bring a vial of her blood to the local hospital to quickly screen for carbon monoxide. And within 5 minutes of doing that, they learned that her levels were completely normal, which of course strongly suggested that she died before the fire was set. And this was further confirmed after the second autopsy that was performed on December 8th, because during that autopsy, they learned that Melissa's true cause of death was strangulation. Yes, you heard that right. A beautiful, wonderful woman who was 9 months pregnant was strangled to death right before she was about to give birth to her first child. A medical examiner found evidence of severe petechial hemorrhaging in her neck and in her cheeks, as well as signs of blunt force trauma. Plus, and this is horrible, you guys, but it was determined that she'd likely also been sexually assaulted. Now, as we know, Matt did tell investigators that the two of them had sex, but based on her other injuries, they were not convinced at all that this was consensual sex. So they performed a sexual assault kit and collected swabs from under her nails as well and sent that all out for testing. And by this point, Matt was their number one suspect, but they didn't want to rush to an arrest. And even if they wanted to, it's not like they could, because even though it might have been the end of 2020, and I can't remember how bad things were towards the end of 2020, and obviously there were a lot of ups and downs during the pandemic, but COVID at this point was still slowing things down significantly when it came to getting lab results. So even if they wanted to arrest him, they couldn't. And quite frankly, this was a huge disappointment to Melissa's family. By this point, with everything they knew, they felt very confident that Matt was responsible, and to just know that he was out there living his life, it was terrifying and infuriating. Matt was someone who was supposed to be out there saving lives. Yet he was responsible, allegedly at this time, of taking two, one being his own child. And I don't think there are enough words in the English language to describe how disgusting you need to be to do that to a pregnant person, let alone someone who is pregnant with your child. And it's really just devastating to think about how excited Melissa was as she was gearing up to give birth and then become a mom. She was so excited about her future and had so many plans for herself and her son, only for it to be taken away before it ever began. And she was actually keeping Barrett's name a secret from her family, which is very, very common. Most people, it seems to me, most people will keep their baby's name a secret until they announce it after the baby is born. Sometimes families know, of course, sometimes they don't. It's a surprise for everyone. And I don't know what her reasoning for that was. I know for a lot of people, it's like they don't want anyone to put doubts in their head about the name that they have chosen. But for whatever reason, she was really excited to eventually tell them the name that she had decided on. Now, her family did know that his nickname was going to be Little Bear. So they had been taking guesses, but it wasn't until after she died, when they were going through her things, that they learned what it was actually going to be. Police had given them access to the house a few days after the fire, and when they were going through her stuff, Cassie found a note that confirmed that his name would be Barrett. And as devastating as that is to think about what that moment must have been like for them, I'm very thankful that they had the opportunity to learn what his name was going to be and get to know him like the tiniest bit, since they never got to actually meet him while he was alive, at least. And I cannot imagine what it would have been like going through that house, especially because, I mean, this was a family home for them. There were so many memories, and then for it to become this place of tragedy, and to see all of Melissa's belongings, all of the baby toys that she had already picked out, blankets and, things that she was planning on building memories with her son that she never had the chance. And with all of them, I mean, I cannot imagine what a heavy situation that would have been. Everything was covered in soot, if not completely melted. And in those moments, the weight of losing both of them was even more painfully real than it already was. And then there was the funeral, which took place on December 14th. And because of COVID, they only did a small family service. And they did decide to have an open casket. And this is heartbreaking, you guys, but Deanna said that she wanted to hold her grandson's hand, knowing that her daughter, his mom, never had the chance to do that herself. And she said she practically gasped when she touched him the first time, but when she did, she never wanted to let him go. Deanna was actually the last to leave the cemetery after all was said and done, and the strength it took for all of them to carry on each day after this was beyond difficult, but they weren't going to give up their fight for justice, even if the reality was that it was going to take a while, which they knew it probably would. But they called investigators at least once a week while they were waiting for the arrest to be made. And that was a drastic difference from Matt, who never once reached out about the investigation, which also tells you a lot, right? I mean, if he were innocent, you would hope that he would want to know who killed his child and the mother of his child, right? But no, he didn't seem to give a fuck. All Matt cared about, because he is a selfish pig, is moving on with his own life at this time. And that's exactly what he did. Investigators got a search warrant for his and Melissa's phone records to see if there was any communication between the two of them that stood out. But honestly, it was his communication with other women that stood out even more. Because it turns out that Matt over here was quite the player. Shocking, I know, especially when you consider, his face. But yeah, despite him not being the best looking lad out there, It looked like in addition to Melissa, he had a number of other women that he was sleeping with, including a girlfriend who it appeared he was living with. And once they saw this, investigators started to piece together a motive. I mean, it was all coming into place here. The picture was being painted. What if Matt killed Melissa because having a baby with her would prevent him from living this bachelor lifestyle that he currently had? Which is ridiculous and stupid logic on his part because she wasn't even forcing him to be in their lives. That's what's so mind-blowing about this case is nobody was asking him to give up literally anything because somewhere in his stupid little rat brain, he thought that killing her would make him better off. And thankfully, investigators were closing in on him, even if it was taking a while. So 6 months after the DNA and sexual assault kit was sent off for testing, the results showed that there was male DNA under Melissa's fingernails, which is a telltale sign that a victim fought back. And there was also male DNA found in her vagina. And it didn't tell them whose DNA it was, but they got a search warrant to swab Matt because they strongly believed it came from him. But they didn't actually go and get that swab right away because first they wanted to talk to his fellow firefighters. And I'm sure most of you know that your, I don't know the correct term, but your, I believe, squad, your fire squad, your team, you all spend a lot of time together. I mean, they are spending overnights together, days on end, and fire units end up becoming very close. Fire departments, maybe I should say. Sorry, I don't know the correct terminology there, but I know I do have a friend who's a firefighter, and I know how much he spends with his fellow firefighters and how close all of them are. And more specifically, they really wanted to talk to his captain, Robert Schultz. And what they learned from Rob was very interesting. It turns out that nobody at the fire station, despite how close they should have been, right, knew anything about Melissa or about her pregnancy and the fact that he was the father. Now, Matt, I guess, was known as being one of the quieter guys, but still, this is a group of men who celebrated fatherhood. So when Rob found out about all of this, he was in shock. He was in disbelief. And he also just couldn't even wrap his mind around the fact that Matt was being investigated as a suspect. I mean, he at first thought investigators maybe had the wrong guy. But then it all really clicked for him when he looked back at the calendar and saw that on November 25th, Matt had called out of work that day. Something about a leg injury, which obviously was a lie. But that just all clicked for him in that moment. I mean, the whole thing, he said, made him feel sick to his stomach, especially because it had now been 9 months since everything had happened, and nobody at the station knew a thing about it. Not about Melissa, not about the pregnancy, but even more shocking, he hadn't told anyone that both of them had died in a house fire, of all places. I mean, they're a fire department, and he doesn't even mention this. And it wasn't just the guys at the fire station that he didn't tell, it was everyone. I mean, he didn't tell a single person in his life about Melissa or the baby or the fact that they died, including his own parents. But his parents actually did know about it. And it turns out that Melissa was the one who initially told them. And she said she did this because she wanted them to have the opportunity to be part of their grandchild's life. And I'm guessing she also wanted there to be a possibility of her son knowing his grandparents. And I guess Matt was pissed at her when she did that, which with his track record is not shocking, right? But the fact that this was kept a secret only made the investigators' theory seem much more likely. So they decided to bring him in for a second interview, hoping that maybe they could get him to just confess. I mean, with how long things in the lab were taking, they knew that getting a swab from him and matching it to the DNA was going to take a while. So they were just hoping that with all the circumstantial evidence they had against him, maybe they could just get him to talk. But Matt, being Matt, did pretty much just the opposite of that. On August 28th, 2021, he was pulling out of his driveway with another woman in the passenger seat when he was stopped by investigators and told to come into the station. And by this point, he had already been put on administrative leave at work, so he likely knew that the walls were closing in on him. Despite that, though, he stayed almost completely silent during that 7-hour interview. And they did not take it easy on him. They straight up accused him of murder, and at no point did he ever deny it or try to defend himself. He just sat there like a bump on a log staring at them or staring at the floor.
Was it an accident? As a man, just let's talk. Verbalize with me, man. Please. Can we look at each other, please? All right. We've given you courtesy. We're talking to you as adults, right? As men, all in this room. Can you at least look at me and verbalize? Can you do that for me? Matt? Yes? Can we talk?
Now, I apologize to any of my audio-only listeners for all that silence in that clip, but that tells you exactly how it went if it wasn't already obvious. That was Matt not responding to anything that the investigators were asking. And I could play 50 clips, probably more, that sound exactly like that, but I think you get it. Matt was not going to confess. And to be clear, he wasn't mute the entire time, but he was still very selective about when he chose to speak. And at one point, they even asked him if he intended to kill Melissa, to which he responded, "I had no intention of hurting Melissa," which of course isn't technically an admission of guilt, but investigators definitely took it as him saying that he hurt her in some capacity.
Your answer was no, I didn't intend to hurt her. That's what your answer was. Okay? Okay, so was this an accident then? Was her death an accident? Yes or no? Matt, was this an accident? Yes or no? Yes or no, Matt?
Would it be easier for you to nod? Was this death an accident?
There was even a point where he was going over the timeline again, and he mentioned that when he was leaving, that Melissa was about to go make some food, which obviously he is just trying to set up the scene, right? He is trying to set up a story of how the house caught on fire. But keep in mind, and I'm sure you already are, that he is a firefighter and he has the knowledge on how to set a fire and make it look like an accident. And I mean, that alone is just something you can't ignore. But one thing that really popped out to me is what an idiot he had to be to have all the experience he has in that industry and to not realize that they are going to quickly realize that she didn't die in the fire since she didn't have any carbon monoxide in her system. He just really wasn't doing himself any favors with this whole interview, and it only ended after 7 hours when he asked for an attorney. And I'm surprised it took him that long to do so. And by that point, you can just tell how pissed those investigators were.
Do you think you'd like to talk to an attorney, or do you want to talk to an attorney? Because I think I'd like a fucking ham sandwich right now, but I don't see a ham sandwich anywhere around here. So do you think you want to talk to an attorney, Matt, or do you want to talk to an attorney?
Yeah.
Yeah, what?
Yeah, what?
Yes. I would like to talk to an attorney.
Yes, you would like to talk to an attorney.
Yes.
Have a seat.
Now, after that, they did decide to go ahead and take those DNA swabs, but once again, it was going to be a waiting game, unfortunately. The lab was moving at what felt like slower than ever, and her family was understandably growing impatient. And quite frankly, so were investigators. And they weren't moving slowly for fun or because they were being lazy. They wanted justice, but they had to do this right. But they had one final trick up their sleeve that they hoped would seal a confession. They basically knew that Matt was never going to confess to police, but investigator Ketter thought maybe he would confess to someone he trusted. So in late August, they decided to give Robert Schultz a call. And this time, they asked him if he would be willing to wear a wire. And at first, he said no, which I get where he was coming from. It's understandable to agree because He didn't like the idea of getting in the middle of it, and I think more than anything, he knew that if Matt was capable of killing someone, that this could potentially be a dangerous situation for him, and I think having hesitations about it is natural. But Rob really seems like a good dude, and at the end of the day, after he had time to think about it, he realized that even if he didn't want to do it, it was something that needed to be done, because even if there was a chance that it could help Melissa and her family, he was willing to take that risk. So on September 9th, 2021, Rob called Matt into the station to talk. Investigators put a listening device on his phone, which he just set down on his desk, and then had a few guys in an adjacent office just in case things went south. But once again, Matt sat there practically in silence. And I don't know if it was because he guessed that maybe there was a wire, or because he was so ashamed of himself, or I don't know what his deal is. But at one point, Rob was just pleading with him to come forward, but he didn't even flinch. He just sat there, emotionless, with his head down like a big bitch, and waited until it was over, which was really unfortunate because that just left investigators with no choice but to wait out the results of the DNA test. And this is also really interesting because I had no idea that the Amazon devices, like the Echo and I can't remember the other names for them. It's Alexa, right? Like any of those Alexa devices. I don't have any of those, but I didn't realize that they actually record audio. And there was an Amazon Echo at the house, and they collected it from the scene. So they were also waiting for the contents of that to be searched. And they thought that it was possible that maybe it picked up some of the audio of what happened. And I kind of got my hopes up when I first heard about that, but I'll let you know now that it didn't end up picking up anything, which was very unfortunate. They also had to wait for the fire marshal's report, which ultimately confirmed that the fire was set intentionally, specifically with the intent of concealing a homicide. So that was good news for investigators, but it wasn't enough. They really just needed that DNA to come back as a match to Matt if they were going to arrest him anytime soon. And finally, in March of 2022, it did. And it turns out, no big surprise here, but the DNA under Melissa's fingernails was a match to Matthew Plody, indicating that she struggled with him. She fought back as he was taking her life. The DNA from the sexual assault kit also came back as a match to him, and given her injuries, they did not believe that this was a consensual encounter like he was suggesting. So on March 8th, the warrant was issued for his arrest, and on the 9th, they finally got his sorry ass. In total, he was facing 10 counts, including 4 counts of first-degree murder, 3 counts of intentional homicide of an unborn child, 1 count of residential arson, 1 count of aggravated domestic battery, and 1 count of concealment of a homicidal death. They held him on a $10 million bail, which he unsuccessfully tried to get reduced in April of that year. And it didn't matter if he had no prior convictions. The judge recognized the threat that he posed to society and was not willing to risk letting him get out, even if it was just temporarily, which was a decision that their family was very grateful for, and I'm sure the whole community was as well. Overall, they were happy to know that Matt was behind bars, and he was actually arrested on her dad's birthday, which I thought was kind of cool, but obviously an arrest is just the start. They knew that there was a lengthy judicial process ahead of them, which was anything but straightforward. In November of 2023, over 19 months after his arrest and 3 years after the murder, Matt still hadn't even gone to trial yet. And this is when he and his attorney tried to get the charges thrown out altogether. They argued that too much time had passed between the alleged crime and Matt's arrest, but luckily the motion to dismiss was denied because it is just absolutely ridiculous. And a trial date was finally set just shortly after that for March of 2024. Now, to you and I, and to all of her loved ones, friends, and family, it was pretty damn obvious that he did this, right? But his defense attorneys definitely tried being the key word, to paint a different picture. They tried to say that Matt was an upstanding citizen who served his community as a volunteer firefighter and paramedic. And why would someone like that all of a sudden turn around and take the life of a pregnant woman? They also pointed out that as a firefighter, he would have set a better fire if he was truly guilty, which is honestly kind of funny that they tried to make that argument, because they were just basically pointing out that he is an idiot, that he doesn't know what he's doing, even though that's his job. But yeah, they basically tried to argue that he would have set a fire that would have completely burnt down the house, all of the evidence, leaving no room for doubt. They also tried to say that the prosecution falsely painted him as a monster and zeroed in on him without even focusing on other suspects. But guys, just look at this man. This is a monster. And with everything we know about him, it's ridiculous for them to say, oh, you tried to paint him out to be a monster. He's this great guy. Sometimes I hear the arguments from the defense, and I'm just like, do they really think that this is going to work, that the jury is going to be stupid enough to buy this? And do I need to remind you that nobody else had any motive whatsoever to want Melissa dead, and Matt had a very clear motive. And that was a big part of the prosecution's argument. I mean, Matt was the only person who benefited from Melissa's death and the death of his own son. They argued specifically that he killed her in order to protect his playboy bachelor lifestyle, which would have been hindered by having a baby. And let's not also forget that he told nobody in his life about her, which prosecutors argued was strategic. Basically, they're arguing that his mindset was, if nobody knows that he's having a baby, nobody will ask when the baby doesn't arrive. Now, in terms of testimony, the prosecution called several witnesses to the stand over the course of 3 days. And I won't go through it all, but I'll give you some of the highlights. Starting with the main fire investigator who determined that this fire was intentionally set. His name is Michael, and he testified that there was no evidence to indicate that the fire was electrical or related to some kind of cooking accident. Now, the defense, of course, cross-examined him pretty hard because his report used words like most likely and it is believed, and they tried to argue that that left room for doubt. They even brought in their own fire inspector who contradicted Michael's testimony, but he did admit that he never went to the scene himself, that he just reviewed evidence through pictures. Both of the forensic pathologists who conducted her autopsies also testified, and they confirmed that Melissa was killed before the fire was ever set. There was no soot in her airways. Her carbon monoxide levels were completely normal. The injuries to her body confirmed that her cause of death was strangulation. And one of the pathologists actually said that Melissa's body had the most petechial hemorrhages that she had ever seen in a strangulation case, which just tells you the force that this maniac used on her. And God, dude, just thinking about what had to be going through her mind in the moments that she was being strangled, knowing that there was nothing she could do to try and save her baby. I mean, she fought back as hard as she could, but just so vile. I don't know how you could do that to someone, let alone someone who is carrying your child. I think to do something like this, you have to be completely demented. You have to be evil. Like I said earlier, he's a demon. And then I also wanted to mention that a neighbor also took the stand because on the day that Melissa was killed, he actually witnessed a man entering her house. He said that the guy was wearing a hat and he didn't get a good look at who he was, but at first he thought he was like a salesperson or something like that. But then he watched Melissa let him inside, which he thought was strange. He even talked to Gus about this shortly after the murder, and he thought it was weird too because Melissa was on strict orders not to be around other people before she gave birth because of COVID. Now, the last piece of testimony I want to go over because it is extremely important was from Melissa's sister, Cassie. If you remember, the two of them had that phone call on the day that she died when Matt unexpectedly just showed up at her door, and Melissa said she would call her sister right back after seeing what he wanted. But as we all know, Melissa never made that call back to her sister, and that's what Cassie testified to. And I'm sure you all understand why what she had to say was so important. Clearly, Melissa would have called Cassie back if she could have, but she couldn't because the person who interrupted their call killed her before she had the chance. And Cassie's testimony was actually heavily disputed before the trial even began. During a preliminary hearing, the defense tried to get it thrown out because they said it was hearsay, but the judge obviously allowed it because why wouldn't they? He also allowed 4 hours of that 7-hour interrogation to be played, and boy, was that powerful. The defense was super against this because they felt like prosecutors were trying to make it seem like Matt's silence was some kind of admission of guilt, when in reality, of course, he did have the right to remain silent. And they basically tried to say that his silence meant nothing and that jurors should recognize that Matt had always been forthcoming about why he went to her house in the first place, because he wanted to help out with the baby. But ultimately, the jury was smart and they sided with the prosecutors. After 5 days of testimony and only 2 hours of deliberation, Matt Plody was found guilty on all 10 counts.
Matthew Ploti, the man accused of killing his pregnant girlfriend, the mother of his unborn child, is found guilty of first-degree murder Friday evening after nearly 2 hours of deliberation. A jury convicts 36-year-old Ploti on all 10 charges, including premeditated first-degree murder and intentional homicide of an unborn child. Ploti is showing no emotion as the verdict is read to the court. This comes after 4 days of witness testimonies. The state's final argument maintains Ploti was the only person with the motive to kill Melissa Lamish and their unborn child. Lamish's mother, Deanna, says there is no coming back from the loss of their daughter and grandchild.
And I'm sure you can imagine that when that verdict was read, Melissa's family was just overcome with a massive sense of shock and relief. And the emotions had to just be unbelievable for them. I mean, for years, they didn't even know if he was going to be arrested. So finally getting a guilty verdict that they had hoped for, all of this time was just, there really are no words for what they were feeling, I'm sure. And what's difficult, though, is they did really think that this was the end. Deanna explained in an interview that she thought once he was found guilty, the hearings and motions and all that stuff would end too, but sadly that wasn't the case. In April of 2024, Matt and his attorneys tried to petition for a new trial. They basically were upset about the admission of certain evidence, but this motion luckily was dismissed. But even still, it was hard for her family to feel like they were being thrown back into it when they thought it was all over. Thankfully, though, it was over for real this time in June. On June 27th, 2024, Matthew Ploti was sentenced to life in prison plus an additional 75 years. I mean, they came down on him hard, and I am so happy to see that. Melissa's loved ones had the chance to read victim impact statements before this, and it always really inspires me to see how much courage these families have. I mean, to sit there and speak directly to the person who's responsible for killing your loved one, it takes a lot of bravery. I'm sure there is so much emotion, and to maintain your composure in those moments, I'd imagine, is incredibly difficult. Not only that, they also had to listen to Matt, who spoke. And this sicko, this monster, actually had the audacity to say that he shares in their pain of losing Melissa and Barrett. Like, literally, shut the fuck up. I can't even believe he had the nerve to say that. And if I was in that courtroom, if I was a family member, I would lose my damn mind. To try and make yourself seem like a victim in this as well is just truly mind-boggling. There's just really no words for Matt. No one believes your sorry ass, and you're really only making things worse for everybody. And I'm sure you will not be surprised to hear that Matt has tried to appeal his conviction since then. But for now, his efforts have been unsuccessful, and I don't see that changing. I hope not. For the sake of Melissa's family, I hope it stays that way forever. Now, the way that her family has chosen to honor her memory is truly beautiful. And also the memory of baby Barrett. It's something that I was just blown away by. So before wrapping up today, I wanted to tell you about what they've done. For starters, they've collected children's toys and made donations to local homeless shelters in Barrett's name. And I thought this was especially beautiful, but they also have made donations to the no-kill animal shelter where Melissa got her cat, Antonio. And it's always really hard to share information like this because I know a lot of you are really sensitive about hearing about animals who die as well. But I should probably let you know that her cat also died in the fire. And aside from her son, Antonio was really like her baby. I mean, she loved that cat. So her family wanted to give back to the shelter where she got him. It's called Animal House Shelter, and I'm actually going to leave the link to their website in the show notes in case any of you guys want to make a donation in her memory as well. Another thing that they have done is sponsored a tree at the Morton Arboretum, which is a tree-focused botanical group and research center. And this was one of Melissa's favorite places to go, so they sponsored a beautiful magnolia tree that will be lit up during the holiday season every year for her. They were also able to get a memorial stone put in nearby, which has a quote from her favorite band, which is also one of my favorite bands, The Script, and it says, "Love is why we do it. Love is worth the pain. Love is why we fall down and get back up again. Love is where the heart lies. Love is from above. Love is this. This is love. They also previously started a GoFundMe to help raise money for the efforts, as I mentioned above. And I'm going to link it below because with what they've lost, I know that additional funding will still go to good use. But as wonderful as all of this is, though, nothing will bring back Melissa or give Barrett a chance at life. Melissa was a kind, fierce, strong, and independent person who deserved so much more than what she got at the end of her life. And at the very, very least, I'm so glad that the monster who stole her life and her son's will spend the rest of his miserable existence behind bars where he belongs. That is all I have for you guys today. I definitely want to hear your thoughts on this one. As always, you guys always come through with such interesting comments, and I feel like so many of us share the same brain in a way. Like, you say things that I'm thinking all the time. I feel like we're all very in sync here on this show, and it means a lot to me to have an audience like all of you. But I'll be back next week to discuss another case, and until then, stay safe out there.